Twitter can be a great place to share ideas. The microblogging platform has a large worldwide audience. It's estimated that every day 100 million people are daily active users on Twitter, and that Twitter has 261 million international users. However, as with any other social media, you have to be careful about what you say and post on Twitter. A growing problem is people losing their jobs over inappropriate tweets. Employers attempt to address this problem by establishing rules for employees to follow. According to lawyer Brian Wood, many major employers have social media policies that address activity on both personal and professional accounts. They include advice about basic decency and what would seem to be common sense measures, such as be respectful and protect proprietary company information. What can happen if you don't follow these policies? We'll find out as we examine our top 20 job-ending tweets in this episode of The Infographic Show. Worst tweets that got people fired. Number 20. Teens' job-hating tweet. When will people learn not to trash their jobs online if they want to keep them? BuzzFeed News tells us the story of Twitter user Sella _. Before her first day of work at a pizzeria, the teen tweeted, "Ew, I start this F-ass job tomorrow." Her boss Robert Waple found out about her tweet from one of his workers and decided to fire her online. He tweeted back, "And no, you don't start that FA job today. I just fired you. Good luck with your no money, no job life." Number 19. Got pot tweet? If you're going to do something illegal, the last thing you want to do is to announce it on social media. Sunith Bahirathan, a Mr. Lube employee working in Toronto, learned this lesson the hard way when he tried to make a drug deal via Twitter. To make matters worse, he gave out his location so that everyone could track him down, including the police. Any dealers in Vaughan want to make a 20-sack chop? Come to Keel Langstaff Mr. Lube. Need a spliff, Bahirathan tweeted. "Awesome, can we come too?" responded Constable Blair McQuillan of York Regional Police. Not surprisingly, Bahirathan got fired instead of getting pot. Number 18. Party girl teacher tweets. Carly McKinney was a Colorado math teacher who was not afraid to show her wild side outside of the classroom on social media. The attractive young teacher posted semi-nude photos of herself on Twitter, and she made her penchant for pot smoking public. According to one source, she wrote "naked, wet, stoned" in one tweet, and "maybe I'll teach high just to see what happens" in another. There was a Twitter photo of herself actually smoking pot inside of her car. Once word about her racy tweets got out, she was first suspended and then fired, although her students tried to save her from losing her job. Number 17. Broke girls tweet. Phil Hardy worked as a congressional staffer for Idaho Congressman Raul Labrador until he made an embarrassing mistake. Not realizing he was still logged into Labrador's official Twitter account, Hardy wrote, "Me likey broke girls." According to a Daily Magazine article, Hardy meant to post this comment on his own Twitter account in response to seeing a sexy Super Bowl ad. It featured the two stars of the CBS comedy Broke Girls, Kat Dennings and Beth Bears, pole dancing to Def Leppard's song "Pour Some Sugar on Me." The comment was online for only 14 seconds, but it was 14 seconds too long. Labrador's office apologized for the tweet, and Labrador fired Hardy. Number 16. Chrysler tweet that chews out drivers. According to a Business Insider article, Scott Bartosowicz was a social media strategist for New Media Strategies. He managed Chrysler's Twitter account until one day, like Phil Hardy, he posted an inappropriate tweet meant for his own personal account. On Chrysler's official Twitter account, he dropped the F-bomb and mocked Detroit drivers when he tweeted, "I find it ironic that Detroit is known as the Motor City, and yet no one here knows how to effing drive." Needless to say, Chrysler was not happy about what this tweet did to its public image, and Bartosowicz lost his job. Number 15. Whistleblower tweet. In 2013, developer Adria Richards attended a conference where she heard two men near her making sexual jokes. She was offended by the jokes and could not resist the temptation to vent about the men on Twitter. According to ABC News, she photographed them and tweeted, "Not cool, jokes about forking repos in a sexual way and big dongles, right behind me." The tweet had more negative consequences than Richards could have imagined. One of the men who made the sexist remarks was fired, and so was Richards. The CEO of SendGrid, the company Richards worked for, explained that he dismissed her because he took issue with her decision to publicly shame the offenders by tweeting the comments and photos, and that her actions have strongly divided the same community she was supposed to unite. ABC also reported that Richards received rape and death threats on websites, and that the hacking group Anonymous released a statement that it would take action against SendGrid's users and computer systems if it didn't fire Richards. One source reported that Richards stopped tweeting for a year due to threats and harassment, but has since returned to Twitter. Number 14. Insensitive tweet about a war hero widow. Turning tragedy into an opportunity for political mockery backfired for former Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama volunteer Dan Grillo. In response to Trump's tribute to the widow of fallen U.S. Navy SEAL William Ryan Owens, Grillo tweeted, "Sorry, Owens' wife, you're not helping yourself or your husband's memory by standing there and clapping like an idiot. Trump just used you." According to Fox News, Grillo's tweet offended commentators on both sides of the aisle. It also caused Grillo to lose his job as a principal for Liberty Advisor Group. A company statement said, "Regardless of whether the comments in the tweet were intended to cause the hurt and anger that they ultimately generated, they were unacceptable to us, and the individual who issued the tweet is no longer affiliated with Liberty." Number 13. Tasteless costume tweet. In 2013, Alicia Ann Lynch lost her job and made herself a target for social media persecution because of her thoughtless choice of Halloween costume. On her Twitter and Instagram account, she posted a photo of herself dressed as a bloody Boston Marathon bombing victim for Halloween. The tragic event was still fresh in people's minds because it happened earlier that year in April, and internet users were merciless in their online attacks against her. According to the New York Daily News, Lynch, her parents, and her best friend received vicious threats from strangers who called them after obtaining personal details from a partial photo of Lynch's driver's license. Another source states that Twitter users circulated nude pictures and videos of her found on Tumblr. Unable to tolerate the hate, Lynch closed down all of her social media accounts, but later reopened her Twitter account in an attempt to be forgiven for the costume. Number 12. Sports-related racist tweet. In 2010, former MLB pitcher Mike Bacsik was working as a sports producer and radio personality until he cranked out a racist tweet in a fit of drunken dismay over the outcome of a Mavericks-Spurs game. "Congrats to all the dirty Mexicans in San Antonio" is the tweet that got him suspended and then fired from his job. In an interview with ESPN, Bacsik was apologetic and took responsibility for what he tweeted. "If you want to do a job like this, your guard always has to be up," he said. "It's tough because my guard was down. I learned my lesson. I'm owning up to what I did. I did a horrible thing. I'm very sorry and will try my best for my actions to speak louder than my tweets." Number 11. Sacco sacked for racist tweet. You would think that public relations executives, of all people, would be careful about what they post on Twitter, but Justine Sacco was not. According to one source, she wrote, "Going to Africa. Hope I don't get AIDS. Just kidding, I'm white." By the time her long flight to South Africa was almost over, her racist comments spread across the internet, offending people far and wide. The company she worked for, Interactive Corp., could not keep her on as a PR executive amidst the public outrage created by her racist tweet. Sacco was fired and joined the ranks of the other doomed public relations people on this list. Number 10. Roseanne Barr's racist tweet. Roseanne Barr made headlines earlier in 2018 when she was fired from her sitcom for posting a racist tweet about former Obama advisor Valerie Jarrett. Barr tweeted that Jarrett was equal to the Muslim Brotherhood and Planet of the Apes, according to a Guardian article. Since her firing, Barr was somewhat apologetic and has provided a wide range of explanations for this indefensible tweet. She said in a YouTube video that she thought Valerie Jarrett was white. She even tried to blame Ambien, but Sanofi, the company that manufactures Ambien, wouldn't let her get away with that excuse. The company tweeted, "Racism is not a known side effect of any Sanofi medication." Number 9. Firefighters' sexist tweets. In 2013, two Toronto firefighters named Matt Bowen and Lawan Edwards were fired for posting sexist comments on their Twitter accounts. It was widely reported that Bowman tweeted remarks like, "Reject a woman and she will never let it go," one of the many defects of their kind. Also weak arms. And, "I'd never let a woman kick my ass. If she tried something, I'd be like, hey, you get your bitch ass back in the kitchen and make me some pie." According to The Observer, both lines were from TV shows that were intended to make fun of people who are sexist. Edwards is best known for his misogynistic tweet, "Would swat her in the back of the head be considered abuse or a way to reset the brain?" Both firefighters were fired because these tweets were deemed to be in violation of city policy, according to one source. However, they challenged their dismissals. Bowman's termination was upheld because he posted other tweets that were more disturbing than the offensive TV lines, such as this one, reported by an online legal news website called AdvocateDaily.com. Quote, "If you were deaf, I would rape you and then break your fingers so you can't tell anyone." However, AdvocateDaily.com states that Edwards was reinstated because his SWAT tweet was considered to be an isolated instance. An arbitrator overseeing the firefighter's case said in her decision, "While I have found that the swat in the back of the head tweet was inappropriate, I find that termination is too harsh a penalty for that comment." Number 8. Instant Karma Tweet. In 2017, sociology professor Kenneth L. Story unleashed a storm of social media outrage with this irrational and insensitive tweet about Hurricane Harvey. "I don't believe in instant karma, but this kind of feels like it for Texas. Hopefully this will help them realize the GOP doesn't care about them." People did not like Story's belief that Texans deserve to suffer hurricane damage because of their political preferences. According to one source, his employer, the University of Tampa, received a flurry of criticism for the post, and Story was promptly fired. Number 7. Police death cheer tweets from Subway worker. Some people hate the police, and Subway worker Sierra C-Baby McCurdy is one of them. She was far from sad when she found out about a double murder of 2 police officers. She tweeted, "2 police officers was shot in Hattiesburg tonight. Got 'em. And police take away innocent people's lives and get away with it. F them, no mercy." Twitter users who came across her cold-hearted tweets showed her no mercy, demanding that Subway fire her. Subway complied with their request. Number 6. Insensitive sexual assault tweets. Making fun of people's tragedies is a bad idea whether you're online or not. According to a Mashable article, veteran war correspondent Nir Rosen raised public ire with some thoughtless tweets about Lara Logan, a CBS chief foreign correspondent who had suffered a brutal and sustained sexual assault. Instead of offering sympathy, he tweeted such insensitive comments as, "I'm rolling my eyes at all the attention she'll get," and "It would have been funny if it happened to Anderson too." Rosen was not technically fired from his position as a law fellow at the NYU Center for Law and Security, but Forbes reports that a statement from NYU indicates that his resignation was almost certainly under pressure from the center. Number 5. Trump incest tweet. According to an entertainment news website called The Wrap, Politico reporter Julia Ioffa tweeted in 2016 that Donald Trump is either effing his granddaughter or he's shrinking nepotism laws. In response to her tweet, Politico ended her contract early and sent a letter out to employees. "We understand how absolutely infuriating it is to have incidents like this tarnish Politico and the great work being done across the country," the letter said. "We feel the same, and as such, there will be little tolerance for this type of behavior." Fortunately for Ioffa, she was on her way to another job at The Atlantic at the time she made the offensive tweet. The Atlantic did not seem worried Ioffa might make a similar blunder in her new position. Washington Post reporter Eric Wemple tweeted, "Atlantic said it's confident Julia Ioffa will adhere to MEG standards when she comes aboard in January." However, she did not stay long with The Atlantic, leaving it in 2018 to become a political reporter for GQ. Number 4. Gross Golden Nachos tweet. We've all heard stories about what restaurant employees do to the food they serve to customers, and Taco Bell employee Cameron Jankowski provided his own disgusting contribution by tweeting a photo of himself peeing on some nachos at work. According to the Daily Mail story, Jankowski defended his action by calling the photo a prank. The photo won him the title winner of the Piss Olympics from Hunter Moore, who is known for the now defunct revenge porn website Is Anyone Up? Jankowski also tweeted that he did not give the urine-soaked nachos to anyone, and that there are no laws saying what you can and cannot piss upon. These arguments did not quell the growing backlash from internet users. A hacking group called Anonymous asked their 140,000 followers to find this Taco Bell employee, and it created a video of Jankowski's tweets, with a series of photographs of him to shame him. Taco Bell soon found out what Jankowski did and fired him. Taco Bell spokeswoman Amy Kavanaugh said, "We find this prank absolutely unacceptable, and we plan to terminate anyone involved and work with authorities to pursue legal action." Number 3. James Gunn's rape and pedophilia tweets. There's a saying that once something is on the internet, it stays on the internet forever. Director James Gunn would probably agree after losing his job as director of the Guardians of the Galaxy franchise over some old but still offensive tweets that recently surfaced. USA Today reported that tweets such as, quote, "I like it when little boys touch me in my silly place," unquote, and, quote, "The best thing about being raped is when you're done being raped and it's like, whew, this feels great not being raped," unquote, did not uphold Disney Studios' values, so the company fired him. Number 2. Anthony Weiner's first lewd public tweet. This list would not be complete without mentioning the first major social media mistake of sexting addict Anthony Weiner. The troubles for the New York congressman began when he tweeted an indecent photo of himself to a 21-year-old female college student in 2011. Unfortunately, Weiner sent it as a public tweet. The tweet was deleted, but not in time to avoid detection. According to Salon.com, a Twitter user named Dan Wolf retweeted Weiner's scandalous tweet, and the retweet got the attention of blogger Andrew Breitbart. Breitbart later published a piece on Weiner's deleted tweet, and soon the tweet received national attention. To make a long story short, Weiner tried to deny the tweet was his, but later he owned up to it and was out of a job after he resigned from Congress. Number 1. Infamous Trump head tweet. Kathy Griffin likes to shock people with her comedy, but she went too far in 2017 when she posted a photo of herself on Twitter and Instagram holding what looked like the bloody decapitated head of President Donald Trump, which was actually a mask. The horrible social media stunt received widespread public condemnation. Even Democrats, such as her friend Anderson Cooper, did not approve of the photo, according to one source. There were other negative consequences. An article posted on The Wrap reports that in the aftermath of the incident, Griffin lost a number of jobs, including on CNN's New Year's Eve show with Anderson Cooper and multiple live gigs. She was also investigated by the Secret Service and received death threats, according to a Hollywood Reporter article. The year was 1953 and British criminal Alfred George Hines was serving 12 years in prison. But the Nottingham prison where he was held wouldn't be able to contain him, as he eventually got through locked doors and climbed a 20-foot wall to freedom. He spent almost a year across Europe before being recaptured, and then quickly escaped while awaiting trial and headed straight for the airport. He was caught again, but escaped from Chelmsford prison and fled to Ireland, where his freedom lasted 2 years. He became notorious in the British media, dubbed Houdini Hines, and was inducted into Mensa after his eventual release from prison. Many people consider him the greatest prison escape artist of all time. This video is not about people like him. There are around 2,000 prison escapes each year in the United States, but that number is dwarfed by the number of escape attempts. Most of these are foiled very quickly, and most never even get off the grounds of the prison. Common tactics for escaping prison include trying to scale the prison walls, running into the nearby woods, or attempting to get smuggled out of the prison. Guards know how to look out for these tactics by now, and uncreative inmates usually find themselves right back where they started, maybe with a longer sentence or less comfortable quarters. Other inmates are taking a more aggressive approach and starting riots or taking guards hostage. Those usually end in a standoff and hostage negotiation that's highly unlikely to end with release. But some inmates take more creative approaches to escape. We said creative, not effective. Kenneth Burnham was doing a few years in prison for burglary when he started to get stir-crazy. He watched other inmates in his Hamilton County, Tennessee prison get prepped for release and thought, why not me? Then he took that a bit too literally. As another inmate was about to be released on bond awaiting trial, Burnham took advantage of the light security and decided he'd simply take that man's identity. He presented himself when the officers came to collect the lucky inmate and signed all the paperwork. He was just minutes away from freedom. There was just one problem. The inmate set for release, Glenn Taylor, was black and Burnham was definitely not black. Prison officials looked on the sheet and saw the issue, and Burnham's not-so-great escape was stopped in its tracks. Burnham briefly claimed to have not been aware Taylor was black, but admitted he just wanted to escape. He wound up being charged with criminal impersonation and attempted escape, ensuring he'd have a bit longer to cook up half-baked escape attempts. At least he stayed clean, unlike our next inept inmate. Everyone remembers the famous prison escape from the Shawshank Redemption, as innocent lifer Andy Dufresne tirelessly tunneled his way out of his cell and escaped through the prison's sewer system. But fact isn't as glamorous as fiction, as one Brazilian inmate found out. He tunneled out of his cell into the sewer system too, but he wasn't all that well prepared. He decided to make his escape wearing only a pair of shorts. Not ideal wear for digging around through human waste to make your escape. At least the sewer's a clear shot to freedom, right? Wrong. From the moment the unfortunate prisoner decided to make his escape, it was nothing but one humiliation after another. He got stuck in the sewer only a few feet from his cell, lost his shorts in the sewer, and had to be pulled to safety covered in filth and completely naked by two other men. The man's ill-advised escape attempt was caught on video that went viral around the world, but his name was never released to the public and no one knows what became of him. He's probably happy about that. It's hard to keep cool in prison, but one inmate took impatience to another level. Andrew Wilson seemed to be a model prisoner, doing time for burglary, theft, and possession of controlled substances. He had to keep his nose clean in prison and was approaching his parole board hearing. All he had to do was stay calm and do his work detail. Wilson wasn't considered a high-risk inmate, so he was given a little more freedom, which one day he decided to take full advantage of. He stole a truck at the work camp he was serving at, drove off, and ditched the truck to run to freedom in the next town. He tried to stay ahead of the authorities, but it wasn't long before he was caught with drugs on his person. He was facing new charges of possession and escape from custody and would be extending his stay in Tennessee's Corrections Department. But he did get one piece of good news when he was back in custody. The parole department had approved his release only 24 hours after he escaped. Patience is a virtue, but not for Andrew Wilson. Making an escape from prison is hard enough. Staying free is even harder. One inmate found that out the hard way. The Olympic Correction Center in Washington was a relatively easy prison to escape from, and James Russell was no rookie. He was serving his 4th prison term and had just been transferred to the minimum security work camp. It didn't take long for the serial thief to take full advantage as he made a break for it and escaped into the nearby woods. But he was in a rural area, still wearing his prison gear, and needed some help to make his escape complete. He came across a cabin at a nearby river resort and decided to sneak in. Sounds like a smart plan. Not like anyone would recognize him. There was just one problem. The current resident of the cabin was a guard at that exact prison that Russell had escaped from. Seeing an escaped inmate, the guard immediately tackled Russell. Russell escaped, but the guard notified all the other guards in the area to be on the lookout. Russell was quickly tracked down by the other guards, facing new charges for escape. The serial offender's brief stay in minimum security was over. Most prison escapees are hardened criminals, right? Not quite. Christopher Boscacci had only arrived at Elmwood Correctional Facility a few days earlier, but he was quickly getting tired of prison life. It was time to get out of there, and he made a break for it. Boscacci was actually much better at escape than most inmates, and the guards were taken by surprise at just how fast he made it over the fences. But he wasn't prepared for just how many fences there were, and after leaving his shoe atop the barbed wire, he was eventually snagged before scaling the last fence. What terrible fate was Boscacci fleeing? The hardened criminal doing hard time was actually facing misdemeanor petty theft charges, and he was staying in a minimum security facility while awaiting arraignment. By making a break for it, he traded his relatively comfortable digs for a stay in maximum security and felony charges that would likely see him staying in the prison system for several years instead of a short stay in county jail or probation. Most prisoners who fail at their escapes just head right back to where they left, but some aren't so lucky. Prison escapes have been going on far longer than the modern prison system, and old-time prisons could be very tricky to escape. What they lacked in modern security they made up for in treacherous designs that threatened any escapee with certain death. That didn't stop Griffith ap Llywelyn, a Welsh king, in 1244. He had been held in prison for much of his life due to conflicts over his father's land, and he was eventually held in the notorious Tower of London by his brother Dafydd in a particularly nasty family feud. He had enough, and he hatched a dangerous plot. He designed himself an improvised rope made from his bed sheets and threw them out the window, planning to scale the Tower of London and rappel down. There was only one problem. All those years in captivity weren't great for exercise, and Griffith's weight was too much for the thin cloth to handle. He did make it down from the Tower of London, but at a much faster speed than he was hoping. Griffith wasn't the only famous prisoner to try and fail to escape, and the next one shows that higher education is no guarantee of strategic smarts. Dr. Samuel Mudd might have simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, treating the injured John Wilkes Booth after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. But his participation in lying to authorities got him a life sentence in prison. He was imprisoned on the isolated Fort Jefferson, and prisoners had a bit more freedom there since they couldn't get off the grounds easily. Mudd befriended Henry Kelly, a teenager working on the transport steamer, and convinced the boy to smuggle him off the island. Mudd changed into professional-looking clothes, snuck into Kelly's ship, and tried to blend in. There was just one problem. He was probably the most famous convict in the country at the moment. He was soon identified by the fort's storekeeper, arrested, and sentenced to hard labor. Kelly also found himself in trouble for participating in the escape plot. But Mudd's story had a happier ending than most failed prison escapees. He was pardoned by President Andrew Johnson and headed home after only a few years. Getting help is a good way to get out of prison, but the partner in crime doesn't always work out. Michael Coleman and Lester Burns were tired of their stay in prison, and when the opportunity presented itself, they made their escape. They were on a long trip in a prison van along with other inmates when they had to make an emergency stop due to a prisoner's medical issue. When the guards were in the hospital with the sick inmate, the inmates were left in the van, and 5 of them watched in shock as Coleman and Burns jumped back into the van and drove it off. There was just one problem. Oklahoma inmate Joshua Silverman wanted no part of this, and when Coleman and Burns stopped the van briefly, he called 911 and let the authorities know exactly where they were. He knew the penalty for an escape attempt and wanted to play it safe, and soon the authorities were all over the area tracking down the inmates one by one. Coleman and Burns were foiled because not everyone they drafted into their escape was on board. Some inmates go further than most to escape, and this next one even got his family involved. Clavino da Silva was a notorious drug trafficker in Brazil, and he was serving a sentence of more than 70 years when he hatched his escape plan. One of the few people who still visited him on the inside was his 19-year-old daughter, and when she arrived, he convinced her to help him. When the daughter left the prison after her visit, everyone noticed she looked a little different, and it didn't take long for the ruse to unravel. It was Clavino da Silva dressed up as his own daughter, and he was less than convincing. A tight pink t-shirt and a rubber mask that made him look like a cartoon character weren't fooling anyone. Making it worse, he had left his daughter behind to serve his sentence. He wound up back in prison, and his daughter found herself facing criminal charges for abetting an escape. One of Brazil's great criminal masterminds found his skills deserting him when it came to getting out of prison. Sometimes all it takes is one error to make a great prison escape fall apart, as our last inmate found out. There was no escaping from the most notorious prison in American history, Alcatraz Island. It had one unique security feature, the raging waters off the coast, which made swimming to shore all but impossible. But that didn't stop inmates from trying, and all 14 escape attempts were foiled, except for 5 men who were never found. Only one man ever got to shore from Alcatraz Island. His name was John Paul Scott, and he would have been a legend if it wasn't for one major misstep. A bank robber doing 30 years, he was sent to Alcatraz in 1949 and served 13 years before making his move. He snuck out using a rope while on culinary duty and left his injured partner in crime behind. He swam all the way to Little Alcatraz, a nearby rock formation, making him the only person to survive the waters without being captured. There was only one problem. He was completely exhausted and collapsed on the rock where he was picked up soon after. Was it possible to escape from Alcatraz? Not for long. There's nothing better than making new friends. That's why you're traveling to an isolated island to spread the good word to an uncontacted indigenous tribe. Okay, so the government says this isn't wise, and maybe they've chased you off twice already with arrows, but soon you'll be winning an award. Well, yeah, but not a Nobel Prize. The Darwin Awards are a satirical award ceremony celebrating the few, the proud, the stupid, who remove themselves from the gene pool by doing something unbelievably stupid. There are only a few rules. They can only remove themselves from the gene pool in the event, and they must die or render themselves unable to reproduce via other means. Let's take a look at some of the most famous winners. Is this a highlight reel or an in memoriam? On this episode of The Infographic Show. Number 11. It was April in Italy, and one man was thirsty, so thirsty in fact that nothing sounded better than a tall drink of water. He needed a supermarket, but there was just one problem. It was Easter Sunday, and in the very original seat of Roman Catholicism, that meant everything was closed. So he did the only thing that made sense. He snuck in the back to look for some delicious H2O, and he found it, towering as high as the sky, a massive pallet full of large packs of water bottles. But he wasn't going to let that stop him. He would just need to jimmy one loose. What could go wrong? Well, he never found out. The supermarket employees did, though, coming in to find a massive pile of collapsed crates. They started digging them loose, and they found a horrifying sight. Underneath was the dead man pinned by the very water he had been seeking. The CCTV footage made it clear what happened. The man had tried to pry a crate of water loose from the middle of the tower and was immediately crushed by a massive pile of heavy bottles and not a drop to drink. Sometimes it's best to just leave well enough alone. Number 10. Pastor Sean was a man of God, but he was also a Florida man, and that would spell his end one day in 2022. It was a warm March day on Lake Seminole, and the pastor and his friend took the boat out. His mistakes started then. He couldn't swim, but he declined to wear a life vest, and sure enough, the boat stalled out in the water. The sheriff had to be called, and a boat soon arrived to bring the two men back to shore. But alas, the pastor's wayward boat was lost, as the sheriff wasn't a tow service. And as for Pastor Sean, it was no man or boat left behind. The pastor called a friend to get him back out on the lake again, and once again he forgot to take a life jacket. It was getting late when he got back out to his boat to try to start it again. He jumped from his friend's boat and capsized it.
He was immediately floundering in the water. His friend tried to pull him up and nearly capsized his own boat, and without the life vest to grab onto, he had no way to get a good grip. And so the pastor sunk down to the depths of Lake Seminole and was no doubt welcomed into the afterlife by a chorus of Florida men shooting off illegal fireworks. We all love pets, but this man loved them a little too much. Number 9. In terms of rare and ridiculous deaths, getting bitten by a venomous snake is not up there. It happens. It's part of the risk of keeping them or handling them. So when police came to make a welfare check on the home of a Maryland resident, David Riston, it wasn't a big surprise to find him dead on the floor due to a snake bite. The man was known to enjoy keeping them, and the odds go up with each snake he handled. But let's just hope that none of the reporting officers had a snake phobia, because this man took testing fate to the next level. Mr. Riston had over 124 snakes in his home, many of them venomous, including rattlesnakes and cobras, but also black mambas, one of the deadliest species of snake in the world. He also had a giant python in case he wanted some variety in his accidental death. The snakes all seemed to be kept in safe enclosures, but one decided to go for a jailbreak, and that led to the end of the unfortunate Mr. Riston. If reincarnation is a thing, maybe embrace the simple joys of hamsters in the next life. There's road rage, and then there's these two brain trusts. Number 8. Berkeley, California, 2021. Everyone on the route is trying to get to work. Someone cuts a few corners, and the next thing you know, there's a collision. Fortunately, no one's injured, for now, because one driver just got out of his car to confront the other driver. And here's the other guy, because one bad decision deserves another. Suddenly, everyone driving gets treated to a show of these two chuckleheads arguing with each other and making threats. And did we mention this wasn't a country road? It was Interstate 80. Soon enough, the inevitable happened. A Mini Cooper swerved to avoid one of the damaged cars and collided directly with the two bickering motorists, sending them flying. Both were dead at the scene. The Mini Cooper driver was deeply traumatized, and it's likely that Highway Patrol had to issue a statement. Please pull over to the nearest rest stop before getting into a brawl over your damaged vehicle. It's safer for everyone, and you can get a donut once you're done fighting. Not many people build their own death trap. Number 7. Mr. Harvey Fite was an ambitious man, and he loved one thing: stonework. He spent years building a massive 6-acre collection of hand-built stone bridges, moats, and sculptures. And by 1976, the 72-year-old was ready to celebrate his life's work. Now he just needed to maintain it. The old-school artist could live among his magnum opus, or at least he could, for a short time, until one day when riding his lawnmower, Harvey decided to get a little too close to one of his stone creations and proceeded to face-plant right off the ledge. Okay, lots of people fall off lawnmowers each year, and if you don't fall under the blades, you're probably gonna be okay. Maybe a bit banged up, but the thing about stone is, it is really hard, and Mr. Fite was killed instantly. Maybe it's just us, but if you're rich enough to create a massive stone quarry as a testament to your power over nature's mightiest objects, you're probably rich enough to hire lawn care. But then few people have built themselves as impressive a memorial as Mr. Fite. Dying building your own Stonehenge is impressive, but this next man picked an even more ancient way to pass on. Number 6. Hawaii is a gorgeous place filled with palm trees, blue lagoons, and volcanoes. And those volcanoes are safe to admire and even visit with caution. Lava doesn't argue, and when you see a sign warning of lava, it's probably best to turn back quickly. After all, this isn't the movies, and you can't have lava ooze right up to you and jump over it. But one ambitious 75-year-old hiker decided he knew better. One night he decided he wanted to see the lava flow up close and personal. Well, he got his wish. Volcanoes National Park is one of the most magnificent sights in the country. But when you see a sign saying "turn back or you will die," it is best to listen. And so he soldiered on into the night when the lava was no doubt extra stunning. We hope he enjoyed it because he didn't come back. On Monday morning, the search parties turned up and he was later found dead. We suspect he'd say the same thing Mr. Fite did. "I'm too old to care about your silly safety rules." In former Soviet Union, laptop downloads you. Number 5. Being a Russian soldier in Ukraine isn't a fun time. You were likely drafted against your will, you're facing death if you desert, and the Russian military's primary strategy seems to be throw bodies at the front lines to slow down the Ukrainian military. So they've got to take some pleasure when they can find it. And as for one soldier in 2022, he was excited to find an abandoned MacBook in the middle of a war zone. Maybe he could use it to stream some Stranger Things while he was in Ukraine, since Netflix is banned in Russia. Now he just needed to find a place to store it. Fortunately, there was a convenient spot in his chest plate. He just needed to remove this one silly piece of armor, and that was actually a ballistic plate designed to repel bullets. Sure enough, he got shot, and MacBooks aren't bulletproof. He was killed immediately, and people who handled his body afterwards also found a stolen iPad on his person. I hope that episode of BoJack Horseman was worth it. This next guy took home security to the next level. Number 4. Ronald Sear, 65, was a Maine man who was nervous about keeping his house safe. He had a whole lot of expensive jewelry at home, and he didn't want to have to rely on his fast instincts to stop a burglar. So he decided to set up some DIY home defense. Based on the kid-friendly contraption that was used to pull out a loose tooth, he rigged up a handgun trigger to pull when the door was opened by someone who wasn't supposed to be there, and shoot the unlucky burglar as soon as they stepped inside. And it worked. A little too well. In 2019, Sear was shot dead. An investigation revealed that he had accidentally triggered his own pull-string death trap when he arrived home, maybe distracted or under the influence. We have a bit of sympathy for this Darwin Award winner. After all, he did pull off his own invention. But knowledge is being able to turn your own front door into a death trap, and wisdom is knowing that maybe you shouldn't. What's crazier than one Darwin Award winner? How about 2? Number 3. Peer pressure is tricky, and we all remember our moms telling us, if all your friends jumped off a bridge, would you follow them? To which these 2 Texas men on vacation in Louisiana went, "Hell yeah!" It was 2019 when the Lake Charles Black Bayou drawbridge was open to let boats through. The safety gate was down, and when our heroes drove up, they decided that they really didn't want to wait. So one man jumped out of the car, pushed up the safety gate, and jumped back in. As the driver hit the gas, they were either going to be legends or a different kind of legend. Despite what action movies might tell you, cars are not meant to jump over large open gaps. The car proceeded to plunge off the bridge and into the waves below. As it was 2 a.m., no workers were around to notify the authorities, and the car, along with the drowned men, were eventually found down below. Hey, at least best friends stick together to the end. And this next guy was a little too confident, and it was a long way down. Number 2. Gary Hoy was a smart man. You didn't get to be a lawyer without having some brains, but you probably also gotta be a little daring. He was giving a tour of his office tower to a group of law students and decided to show how good life could be once they were big, powerful corporate lawyers like him. The massive building was state-of-the-art, including supposedly unbreakable windows. He decided to show off the strength of the windows by throwing himself against them. It was a party trick that he'd done many times. And it worked. Until it didn't. See, the windows were unbreakable, but the window frame, not so much. The force of his impact dislodged the glass from its frame, and it sent the intact window and Mr. Hoy plummeting 24 floors to the ground below. Traumatizing for the students watching and for the larger group of students in the adjacent boardroom, no doubt. When asked about the window failure, structural engineer Bob Greer said that the windows were designed not to break, not to stand up to an attorney's tomfoolery. But no one failed to heat a point more than this last guy. Number 1. John Allen Chow was a young man who was driven by a single passion in life: to spread the word of God. A devout evangelical missionary, there was no place he wouldn't go if he thought people needed to learn about Christianity, including North Sentinel Island, an isolated island in the Bay of Bengal, a protected Indian territory. It's home to the Sentinelese, an isolated indigenous tribe known for being fiercely protective of their island. Laws prohibit traveling within 5 nautical miles of the island to protect the islanders from disease and to protect travelers from their defenses. But Chow didn't mind the law. He had God on his side. After being trained in missionary boot camp, Chow planned an initial first contact with the Sentinelese, which he believed could be, quote, Satan's last stronghold on earth, and he paid 2 fishermen to illegally ferry him over to the island. He made several attempts to contact them, but was met with a combination of mockery and hostility. When he delivered gifts, a boy shot an arrow at him that pierced his Bible. He made one final visit, and the last thing the fishermen saw was Chow's body being dragged away for burial by the visitors. They were soon arrested for violating the protection law and probably decided that they were out of the business of helping Americans. What did the Subway employee who thought filming himself wiping sandwiches on a toilet seat was going to make him famous, and the American teacher who started a classroom fight club for her middle school students to settle disputes have in common? Both were stupid enough to post these videos online and lost their jobs from it. And they are far from the only ones. In today's episode of the Infographic Show, we're looking at the dumb YouTube videos that got people fired. Number 20. In 2018, a young man walked into Starbucks in Philadelphia and ordered an iced coffee, and as per usual, the employee asked him his name, which was Sam. The thing is, Sam had a stutter, so it came out more like Sam. After having a good laugh at the guy's expense, the barista wrote down his name with the extra S's. And just like every other interaction today, someone filmed it all and uploaded it. Starbucks apologized and fired the barista, and as an act of corporate kindness, the company offered to give Sam a $5 gift voucher, just 95 cents short of the price of a cappuccino. Way to go the extra mile, Starbucks. We got quite a few crimes lined up for you today, but let's start with this. One of the stupidest things we've heard in quite some time. Number 19. In 2016, two paramedics working in Florida's Okaloosa County were found to have been in a selfie war with each other. That sounds pretty harmless, but not when they started putting unconscious people in their selfie photos and videos. The paramedics, a 24-year-old woman and a 33-year-old man, did all of this in the backs of their ambulances. They'd switch on the camera and act around with the people who were sometimes injured and even dying. 41 patients starred in the selfies, aged anywhere between 24 and 86, which did not impress those people's family members when the truth finally came out. Of course, they were both fired. Let's lighten things up for this next one. Number 18. In 2009, 5 YouTube videos might have put you off of ordering Domino's pizza for life. The clips consisted of a man doing things like sticking cheese up his nose and wiping salami around his butt. The man, along with his female colleague, who was the camera person and the creative director, went viral and ended up being watched by millions of people. Then, internet sleuths got on the case and figured out the location of the restaurant was in Conover, North Carolina. As Domino's scrambled to rescue its impeccable reputation, the 2 employees were fired. He got 6 months in jail and she got a 45-day suspended sentence and 200 hours of community service. The man later said the videos were posted without his consent, which didn't help Domino's at all because people were now wondering what happens to the pizzas when someone doesn't make a viral video. All in all, they deserve to be fired, but we think these next victims of a viral video were treated a little too harshly. Number 17. We found a few incidents of American nurses making videos at work and then posting them on social media. But our favorite is the one from New Orleans when 7 nurses put on what we think was a stunning dance performance to rapper NLE Choppa's hit song, Slut Me Out. YouTube would not like it if we repeated the words in the song, so let's just say you would serenade your grandma with it. The dance routine included various acts, including one nurse spreading her legs in a wheelchair and another using hospital equipment to mimic her giving oral sex. There was a lot of twerking and what the media called obscene gestures, although uniforms remained on at all times and no patients appeared throughout the entire performance. We'll feature more nurses later in the video, but this next one will involve patients. Number 16. Imagine being fired for saving someone's life. That's exactly what happened to lifeguard Tommy Lopez, who was videoed rescuing a drowning man. Tommy was working at Hallandale Beach in Florida in 2012 when he saw a swimmer in distress. He quickly did his best Baywatch and ran into the ocean, helping the drowning swimmer, who was later taken away in an ambulance. Tommy literally saved this guy's life. He was fired because the company he worked for said he moved out of his section of the beach. They eventually offered him his job back, but he turned it down. On top of that, they later gave this guy the key to the city. Now for one of a handful of incidents involving a wayward teacher. Number 15. In today's classrooms, cell phones are just as useful as pens, and that means a lot of teachers are losing their jobs, sometimes fairly and sometimes unfairly. A female teacher was fired because her Facebook page showed her holding a severed child's head. Just kidding, she was holding a bottle of beer, enough to get her fired. Another U.S. teacher was made unemployed after saying on social media that her 10th grade students were rude, disengaged, lazy whiners. Come on, when aren't 10th grade students like that? And in 2024, a teacher in Detroit was fired because she refused to take down videos of her rapping. One of the parents at the school didn't think that her raps were appropriate. We've seen her videos, and let's just say they're not exactly in the same league as Slut Me Out. But sometimes the victims of a firing have kind of asked for it, such as this next person. Number 14. Have you ever received a package and inside that thing that you bought is just smashed to pieces? Sure you have, and it might be because of a delivery driver who's having a bad day, such as the FedEx guy in 2021, who was launching parcels onto porches like they were javelins. The owner of the house invested in a smart doorbell and caught the driver in the act. The house owner wrote next to the video he posted online, "Every package I've received since I've moved into my new home has been dented or broken. I bought a camera. Now I know why." The video got over 500,000 views, and the delivery guy has since been told that his parcel throwing days are over. Maybe he should try out for the Olympics instead. Number 13. There are a lot of videos out there that show people driving public transport who probably should not be driving public transport, such as the New York bus driver in 2018 who was videoed watching clips on YouTube as he sped down the street, intermittently looking up to check that he, wasn't about to kill all his passengers. When your passengers think it's safer to ride in a New York subway car rather than on the bus, you know you're doing a bad job. Let's now look at something quite disturbing. Number 12. In 2016, a nursing assistant in Kenosha, Wisconsin was fired after it was revealed she'd been uploading very private videos from the place where she worked. One of the videos featured a 93-year-old Alzheimer's patient in a state of undress. Another showed the nurse helping an elderly patient empty his bowels. The 21-year-old assistant was later called immoral for what the court commissioner said was one of the most disgusting cases I've heard in a long time. We found a lot of videos online of people doing very bad things in nursing homes, but let's now return to something a little more humorous. Number 11. It happened in a Subway outlet in 2021, and it involved what the media called a Subway sandwich artist. Yeah, artist, that's what Subway calls a low-paid worker who throws bits of vegetables and meat onto a sloppy bun. Anyway, this artist filmed himself arranging food on one of the restaurant's toilet seats while trashing his job and saying bad things about Subway. He also walked over various food items that he placed on the floor. He was obviously stressed out by his art, but as far as we know, he didn't go as far as cutting off his ear. It turned out that this 21-year-old man had worked all over the place and had posted videos to various social media platforms, not all of them with him doing nasty things to the food. When asked why he did it, he channeled his inner creativity and he said he was struggling to find a purpose in life. Well, at least he has internet fame to fall back on, as does this next man. Number 10. This story is about a snowplow driver in Massachusetts who calls himself Dog, with 2 G's. He was fired in 2013 by the city of Lowell after taking videos of himself driving down the street in his plow. That doesn't sound so bad. Well, Dog with 2 G's wasn't just clearing the roads, he was burying vehicles and blocking driveways with an avalanche of snow. And he enjoyed every single moment. He tried to plead his innocence, saying he was just doing his job. The residents of Lowell were not impressed, and neither were the city chiefs, and Dog was sacked. But that didn't stop Dog with 2 G's from uploading one more video, an apology. Let's move away from the USA for this next one. Number 9. In 2013, a bunch of hardworking miners in Australia lightened up their day by performing an underground version of the Harlem Shake. We think they did a pretty good job, but their bosses at the mine in Western Australia were not impressed and made 15 men unemployed in what might have been the biggest mass firing in viral video history. It seems a bit cruel to fire men for merely dancing. A spokesperson for the mine explained why, telling the media, "Underground mining has strict safety standards as there are accidents and fatalities." Come on, give the guys a break. They didn't even take off their safety helmets. Maybe this next guy also deserved a bit of a break. Number 8. In 2015, a former chief financial officer at a medical device company in Arizona was on food stamps because of a video he posted of himself back in 2012. Adam Smith filmed himself criticizing Chick-fil-A at a drive-thru where he ordered a glass of free water and subsequently exploded into a tirade about how much he despised the company, unleashing on the drive-thru server. It wasn't the food that Smith was angry at. He was addressing accusations from staff about homophobia that appeared in the news. Sure, he shouldn't have taken it out on a low-paid worker, but it seems he certainly paid back his debt to society. Smith was unhireable. He went from earning $200,000 a year and having over $1 million in stock options to claiming Social Security benefits. Every interview he went to, someone would realize, oh, that's the Chick-fil-A guy. We imagine this next person will also find it difficult to get another job. Number 7. In 2024, a teacher in the Rayton School District of Kansas City lost her job just 12 hours after a video showed her performing a WWE-style smackdown on one of her students. She apparently hit the student, got her in a chokehold, and slammed her to the floor. Another student said the battle royale started after a bunch of girls refused to leave the bathroom, and the victim hit the teacher's phone out of her hands. The school later released a standard statement saying MMA-style disciplining of students was not in alignment with our values and practice. Now let's go way back in time to the olden days of MySpace. Number 6. We've already seen how you can get sacked from McDonald's, but what about Burger King? In 2008, Timothy Tackett, also known as Mr. Unstable, had a long day at work. There is no better way to relax than a warm bubble bath. The only problem was that Timmy did it in one of the sinks at the restaurant. Tackett pleaded his case, saying he scrubbed the sink before getting in, but Burger King wasn't happy. That kind of behavior belongs at the Golden Arches, and Timothy was sacked along with the duty manager. As for this next one, well, worse things have happened. Number 5. Paris is known as the City of Love, but not in Disney's eyes. In 2022, a man was down on one knee outside Sleeping Beauty's castle at Disneyland Paris and was about to propose to his girlfriend. Everything was going to plan until a Disney employee wearing Mickey Mouse ears ran in between the couple, snatched the ring, and ordered them to move away. This was obviously your Employee of the Year kind of guy, but the whole thing was videoed, and soon the job's worth was at the sharp end of that thing we've come to love called public outrage. The video of this romance wrecker went viral, and the heartbroken couple were offered a free vacation, which they refused. Disney said the employee had been dealt with, which sounds terrifying. We don't know if Mickey and the boys took care of him or if he was just sacked, but either way, his mouse ears wearing days were over. Number 4. Then there was a mass firing of a bunch of lifeguards at a city swimming pool in El Monte, California. They filmed themselves doing the Gangnam Style dance, back when that kind of thing could make you internet famous. Of course, anyone who actually likes that song should never be allowed to work in public again, and that is exactly what the pool bosses said, relieving those men of their jobs. Well, they might not have said it like we did, but the guys still got fired. In total, 14 of them lost their jobs. The pool bosses described the hip thrusting and gyrating as inappropriate and disgusting. Hey, we don't like the song, but disgusting is taking things a bit far. But after a public outcry, they were invited back to work. They refused the offer, and now 2.4 million people have suffered psychological abuse after watching that video on YouTube. Okay, top 3, and the next one is one of the funniest stories we have for you today. Number 3. This entry takes place in a Walmart store in Canada's Alberta province in 2018. The star of the story was not fired. He was about to quit, but we can guarantee his days with Walmart were numbered. He decided to speak his mind through the intercom to a store full of shoppers. The 17-year-old began his rant with, "Attention all shoppers, associates, and management. I would like to say to all of you today that nobody should work here." That was a great opening, which he followed with, "I'm sick of all the bogus write-ups and my job." After calling out his assistant manager, he left the store a hero, and he never looked back, later posting the video on Facebook with the title, "How I Quit My Job Today." Now for some more naughty nurses. Number 2. In 2017, a patient was lying unconscious in an operating room at the Clínica Santa Cruz Hospital in Colombia. As you would expect, the atmosphere is one of profound seriousness. No, not at all. It's like a carnival in there. One of the nurses whips out her phone, and we see 5 of her colleagues dancing around the unconscious naked body of a man who's been prepped for an operation. Music plays, the nurses laugh and twerk. The only thing that's missing is balloons. You would think the hospital would be proud to have such happy workers. But no, they fired all 5 women, stating they were all good workers but must accept the consequences for breaking surgery protocol. Right, so what about this teacher who ran a fight club? Number 1. Call us old-fashioned, but we think the first rule of Fight Club should be don't do it with 12-year-olds. A female teacher at the Mesquite Middle School in Texas obviously didn't agree. In 2023, she was said to have encouraged her students to settle disputes the old way. But it's not as brutal as it sounds. Before each scrap, she outlined what was acceptable and unacceptable. After all, her students weren't animals. As the boys and girls, some evidently better at fighting than others, fought it out with the desks pushed back, the teacher watched on, telling her students there was a 30-second fight limit. The media said some of the fights ended with students having to clean the blood from their faces. You would think this was a one-off, but another teacher in a Florida middle school also ran a fight club in her classes. This teacher also had a 30-second limit, with the added rules of no hair pulling, no screaming, no yelling, and no phones. There were phones, and that's how she got caught.
Mafia boss. There's few positions of power more feared than this one, but sometimes all it takes to bring you down is ordering too much meat. Al Capone. Who could be more infamous than the legendary mob boss Al Capone himself? Well, this feared mob boss's downfall would start with faking a cough. Born in 1899 to poor immigrant parents, Capone was a good student as a kid, but quickly began to fall behind the other kids as he played hooky. Forced to repeat the 6th grade, Capone got into a fight with a teacher and then with his principal, after which he vowed never to return to school again. That principal inadvertently created the most infamous mob boss in American history. Capone hooked up with a local gang, and in 1917 he earned the nickname of Scarface. One night he made a rude remark to a woman at a bar where he worked as a bartender and a bouncer, and her brother punched him and slashed him across the face with a knife. Soon the name Scarface stuck. Capone made the move to Chicago, where he hooked up with a longtime friend Johnny Torrio again. About this time, Prohibition had gone into effect in the US, and there was a bundle to be made selling illegal booze. Capone was quickly amassing a small fortune, but a new Chicago mayor vowed to crack down on crime and corruption. Capone and his associates responded by launching a voter intimidation campaign that ended up with several voters shot and beat up. Chicago police tracked down Capone and company and ended up killing Capone's brother in a shootout. In 1925, Torrio decided to do the smart thing and retire from a life of crime and move back to Italy. He left Capone in charge, and the rest is basically history. At the height of his smuggling, Capone was earning about $60 million in today's money a year. And then it all started to fall apart because of one dumb lie. In 1929, Capone was subpoenaed to appear as a witness before a federal grand jury in Chicago for a case involving prohibition laws. Capone, who was at his summer home in Florida at the time, responded by telling the authorities that he couldn't make it due to a bad case of pneumonia. The Chicago police contacted the FBI, asking them to check out Capone's story for them. As FBI agents began secret surveillance on Capone, they discovered that he was in perfect health, making frequent trips to the local racetrack, going on vacations to the Bahamas, and going about his life like it was 2020's hot girl summer. The FBI arrested Capone for contempt of court, and though he was released on bond, he was now officially under the FBI's crosshairs. Working with the Treasury Department, Philadelphia, and the Chicago Police, the FBI helped send Capone to jail, though it would be his failure to pay income taxes that landed him the 11-year sentence that finally finished off his reign as top mob boss. Our next crime boss's own family got him permanently put behind bars. Willem the Nose Holleder. One of the most notorious crime bosses in the Netherlands history, Willem the Nose Holleder was born in 1958 in Amsterdam. His criminal career began early, joining a gang that worked under the table for property owners looking to permanently get rid of squatters on their property. While never arrested for it, it's also suspected that he partook in several robberies during his formative years as well. The Nose's father was an employee with Heineken, which may have led to this plan to kidnap the Heineken heir, Freddie Heineken, and hold him for ransom. In 1983, Holleder and his gang executed their plan and kidnapped Heineken and his driver, demanding 35 million guilders, or approximately 16 million euros, or $19.5 million. The police wanted the Heineken family not to agree to the ransom, but the distraught family paid it out anyway. Inevitably, Holleder and his accomplices were caught and imprisoned for the kidnapping. The police never recovered several million of the ransom money, though, and it's believed that Holleder had managed to hide it away. Upon his release from prison for the kidnapping, Holleder used the money to fund a new criminal campaign. He managed to lay low until 2004, when confidant Willem Enstra secretly testified against him to the police. Catching wind of the betrayal, Holleder had Enstra killed, along with another police informant while on a vacation to Thailand. Holleder was suspected in as many as 25 murders, but the police could only bring extortion charges against him. A man that testified at his trial would later be found dead of a drug overdose, and despite the obvious link to Holleder, police still couldn't pin him for any of the dozens of murders he'd either committed or ordered. Holleder would end up getting sentenced to 9 years in prison for extortion charges before being released early in 2013. However, he was quickly rearrested for extortion once more, and this would be his undoing. Holleder's criminal empire would come crashing down because he decided to get chatty.
Believing her brother to be a mass murderer, Holeder's sister Astrid began to visit him in prison while working as a police informant. She wore a wire and secretly recorded Holeder completely confessing to many of the suspected murders, never once suspecting that his own sister was working for the fuzz. With this new evidence in hand, police were finally able to bring murder charges against Holeder, sealing his fate. However, Holeder's outrage at being betrayed would lead to fresh criminal charges while he was already in prison after it was discovered he had attempted to hire two hitmen to kill both his sisters. Today, Astrid Holeder lives in fear of her brother's retaliation and takes great pains to conceal her identity as she goes about her life, even going so far as to wear disguises. Our next mob boss would have avoided jail if he had simply been a vegetarian: Vito Genovese. Vito Genovese was a rising star in the Mafia underworld who would be brought down by one huge order of meat. Born in 1897 in Italy, Vito's family made the move to America in 1913. Almost immediately upon arriving in Little Italy in Manhattan, Vito began to get involved with the local mob. His pure Italian blood lent him an air of legitimacy to the largely xenophobic Italian mob that practically guaranteed membership. His criminal career began with stealing items from pushcart vendors on the street, but soon he had moved up to be an errand boy for local mobsters. Then he got a major promotion and a sign of trust by the local mob. Vito was allowed to go collect money from bookies, setting up illegal lotteries. His criminal career would be briefly interrupted when at 19 he went to jail for a year for illegal possession of a firearm. In the early 1920s, Vito began to work for Giuseppe Joe the Boss Masseria, who had formed a Manhattan gang that would one day evolve into the very family that Vito himself would eventually lead. Working alongside Charlie Luciano and Frank Costello, Vito set up a lucrative bootlegging operation supplying and selling illegal liquor to buyers and underground bars across the East Coast. Rather than end the scourge of bad behavior prohibitionists feared so much, the only thing making alcohol illegal did was enrich an entire generation of criminals. Vito would go on to become the boss after Luciano was sentenced to 50 years in prison for various charges. However, as pressure mounted on Vito due to several high-profile murders he had either committed or ordered, he decided to flee the country and set up shop in Italy. There, he became close personal friends with Mussolini's son and received several honorary awards from Mussolini's government. He even set up the murder of an anti-Mussolini journalist back in New York. As soon as the Allies invaded Italy, though, Vito switched sides and began to work with the Allied forces. He gifted former New York Governor Charles Paletti, now attached to the U.S. Army, a 1938 Packard sedan, and earned his trust enough to be made an interpreter and liaison officer in the U.S. Army's headquarters in Naples. Soon, he was one of the Allied military government for occupied territories' most trusted employees, with nobody having a clue who he really was. Vito used the opportunity to set up a massive black market right under the noses of the Allies, earning him great wealth. However, U.S. military police caught on to the operation and arrested Vito a year later. Discovering who he really was, the U.S. government ordered he be returned to New York to face charges for a 1934 murder. But upon returning, Vito had the prosecution's witness killed. With nobody to testify against him, Vito was released. Vito would go on to secure himself as one of the U.S.'s top mobsters and managed to evade the authorities' attempts to pinch him until 1957. In November of that year, Vito called for a massive meeting of mob bosses from both the U.S. and Italy. Amongst the many topics on the agenda was hashing out gambling and narcotic interests in Cuba, as well as various criminal projects across the eastern seaboard. The meeting took place in an estate in Appalachian, New York. There, State Trooper Edgar D. Croswell became suspicious after observing Pennsylvania crime boss Joseph Barbara's son reserving a great number of rooms in local hotels, as well as ordering a huge quantity of meat from a local butcher. Following his hunch, he reported these findings and state police investigated the criminal gathering, discovering hordes of luxury automobiles all belonging to known crime bosses. Setting up a roadblock, the mobsters realized they were being encircled and many fled on foot, but police nabbed a total of 60 mobsters. While Vito was let go, he was soon arrested with the help of various informants and sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, though he would die of a heart attack on Valentine's Day 1969. Our next mob boss's ego not only led to his downfall, but the downfall of many mobster associates. John Gotti. He was known as the Dapper Don, a title that would help cement his inevitable downfall at the hands of the FBI. Gotti was born in the Bronx in 1940, becoming involved with mob activity by the age of 12. At age 14, he attempted to steal a cement mixer from a construction site, but accidentally caused it to fall, crushing his toes and leaving him with a permanent limp. As he moved to early adulthood, Gotti got involved in various mob schemes and scams, such as hijacking truck shipments coming out of what would have been John F. Kennedy International Airport. This gave Gotti the opportunity to rub shoulders and form bonds with many future big names in the Mafia business, such as Joseph Massino. What followed was a whirlwind rise to power for the young Gotti, eventually leading to his takeover of the Gambino crime family. However, while other capos had chosen to remain in the shadows and not draw public attention to themselves, Gotti was different. Hopelessly vain, Gotti loved expensive clothing and toys and relished showing off his wealth and power whenever he could. He set up an elaborate ritual of sorts at the Ravenite Social Club in Manhattan, where he would arrive to a pre-planned crowd of admirers and made men looking to gain favor or summoned there directly by Gotti. Then Gotti would wave to the present cameras and lookers-on, creating one big spectacle for the world to see. Some mafiosos, however, did not like the spotlight that Gotti was putting on them. This mattered little to the mob's most vain capo, and if you didn't show up when summoned, you ran the risk of getting killed. However, Gotti's biggest fans weren't the crowds of admirers gathered outside the club on his frequent outings, all struggling to catch a glimpse of the dapper Don. It was the Federal Bureau of Investigation, who absolutely relished the opportunity Gotti gave them every week to gather intelligence on mob activities. Thanks to Gotti's demand that summoned mafiosos attend the gala-style public gatherings, the FBI was able to photograph and track even extremely elusive figures in the mob family. Eventually, the treasure trove of intelligence that this led to would lead to Gotti's downfall, and the god-awful reality TV series Growing Up Gotti that the world would be forced to suffer through briefly in the early 2000s.
Who doesn't love a good story about a criminal mastermind pulling one over on law enforcement and sticking it to the man? Well, for every one story of a brilliant criminal getting away with their audacious crimes, there are countless other stories of truly dumb criminals failing spectacularly at their attempts. A homeowner in Johannesburg, South Africa returned home to find their house ransacked and their valuables missing. They immediately called the police to report the burglary, and an officer arrived shortly after to take the homeowner's statement. The officer settled in onto the sofa and the homeowner took a seat directly opposite the officer to begin recounting how they discovered that they'd been robbed. Just as the homeowner started to give their statement, they noticed something was out of place. There, under the very sofa on which the police officer was sitting, was a strange man, clearly trying and failing to be invisible. He was laying there flat on his stomach, half under and half behind the sofa, with his head right behind the police officer's legs. It turns out that the homeowner had arrived home before the burglar had a chance to flee, and he'd been hiding under the sofa as the homeowner called the police and waited for them to arrive. He was immediately arrested. The homeowner's valuables were returned intact, and the police had a rare open and shut burglary case in the bag. If you thought hiding under the couch was a dumb move, wait until you hear about the Goldilocks burglar. In 2014, Martin Holtby and Pat Dyson, a retired couple from Lancashire, England, returned home from a holiday to the surprise of a lifetime. The first sign that something was amiss was the fact that their mail was not sitting on the welcome mat, and their house was clean, suspiciously clean. Pat clearly remembered that the house had been in a state of disarray when they rushed out the door to catch their flights. The sink had been full of dishes and their kitchen was a mess, and yet when they arrived back home they found a tidy kitchen and clean laundry in the dryer. Had someone cleaned up for them as a welcome home surprise? Not exactly. The couple made their way upstairs to the bedroom, and there, fast asleep in their bed, was a strange man. They quietly snuck out of the house and called the police, who arrived quickly and arrested 28-year-old Lucas Czoniowski. He'd been living in the house for days, cooking himself meals and washing his dirty underwear, and he had even bought groceries and cleaned up the mess left behind by the couple. The couple would later learn that the window cleaner had seen the burglar in their home but assumed he was their grandson, since he had appeared to be quite at home in their place. The burglar admitted to his crimes and was given a 2-year conditional discharge and a 200-pound fine. None of the couple's valuables were missing, though Miss Dyson did note that the burglar had burned out an old saucepan, but she said, "That happens." The Goldilocks burglar may not have been the brightest of criminal minds, but at least he was courteous. The same can't be said for these dumb criminals. In the summer of 2012, 2 drunken Welsh tourists made quite the splash at Australia's SeaWorld. 21-year-old Rhys Owen Jones and 20-year-old Kerry Mules decided to take their vacation on Queensland's Gold Coast to another level. After indulging in quite a few drinks, they decided to break into the SeaWorld's park for some after-hours fun. They left a trail of destruction in their wake. The pair vandalized the park, jumped into the water and swam with the dolphins, and set off a fire extinguisher in the shark enclosure. After having their fun, the couple decided to take home a souvenir, a real live penguin named Dirk. When they woke up in their hotel room hungover and confused, the pair tried their incompetent best to care for Dirk, putting him in the shower and feeding him scraps of food. After their hangover subsided, Rhys and Kerry realized how stupid they'd been to take the penguin, so they thought that the best course of action was to release him into a nearby canal, where they were spotted by locals as they were wrangling the poor penguin at their vehicle. The police arrived and they were each fined $1,000 Australian and sent home in disgrace. Thankfully, Dirk was rescued and returned to SeaWorld unharmed. It's never fun to hear about crimes against animals, but this next dumb criminal should make you feel a little bit better. This thief got more than he bargained for when a simple robbery went horribly wrong. The amateur thief had noticed a parked car with the back windows rolled down and decided it was too tempting to pass up the opportunity for an easy score. He stealthily walked toward the car, and as he passed by, he quickly reached through the back window and snatched a heavy tote bag from the back seat. Little did the thief know that the car belonged to Brad McDonald, a professional snake wrangler, and that the windows had been down because Brad had left his latest catch in the car while he ran some errands. The dumb criminal hadn't found an easy score. He'd grabbed a bag full of highly venomous snakes that Brad had just captured from an underground car park in Sydney. That's what you get for being greedy. If that's not enough of a reminder to be careful who you rob, then this next story might just hit the point home. Just before Christmas in 2004, Jason Shinkarik's Winnipeg home was robbed. The thieves stole everything from clothing, jewelry, and watches to cologne and electronics. They also stole every drop of liquor in the house and even took Christmas presents from under the tree. To add insult to injury, the thieves even stole Jason's duffel bags to carry away their haul. Jason was devastated, but the small business owner knew he had to carry on with his life. So the next day, he went to work at his shop, Ponderosa Trading. That very same day, 3 men in their 20s appeared at the shop looking to pawn a variety of valuable items. When the men placed the bags full of goods on the counter, Jason was shocked to recognize his very own duffel bags. He confronted the men, who ran away, but when the police caught up to them days later, thanks in large part to Jason's helpful and detailed descriptions, they were charged with breaking into Jason's home, as well as 3 other homes in the neighborhood, and sentenced to 3 months in jail. Christmas is supposed to be a time for giving, but some dumb criminals just can't get it right. This one might just be even dumber than Jason's robbers. After a 20-year-old college student in Washington was booked for underage drinking, he spent a lonely night in a local police cell before being released the next morning. After his release from the drunk tank, he was caught on camera attempting to steal gifts from under the Christmas tree in the police department's lobby on the way out. After he realized that one box was empty, one held a box of tissues, and another was a box of tampons, the would-be thief fled, leaving the gifts and wrappings scattered in the station parking lot. Getting caught on camera is definitely one way to get spotted, but the way this dumb criminal got caught will really shock you. Milton J. Hodges attempted to rob a Lowe's hardware store in Orlando, Florida, but was chased out of the store by the staff. The failed thief bolted through the parking lot, ran across a busy street, and jumped a fence to escape capture, but he wasn't in the clear yet. He had landed smack dab in the middle of the Cypress Cove Nudist Resort and Spa, and as one of the only people wearing clothing, needless to say, he was easily spotted by police and arrested. You almost have to feel bad for criminals with dumb luck. But when a criminal obviously thinks they're smarter than the police, like this next dumb criminal, then they deserve what they get. Calgary police arrived at the home of a woman who claimed she'd been robbed. She was hysterical as she showed the officers the smashed window where the supposed thief had entered, and she tearfully gave her statement to the police, describing the jewelry and electronics that she claimed had been stolen. Just as she was getting really worked up, her phone rang. It was her French-speaking father, and the officers listened as the woman calmly spoke to her father in French. What she hadn't realized was that one of the officers, Charanjit Maharu, spoke 6 different languages, including French, and that he could understand every word of her conversation, meaning he clearly heard her admit to her father that her entire story was a lie and it was all a scam to get money from her insurance company with a fraudulent claim. Needless to say, some stolen goods were the least of her legal troubles. Lying to the police is dumb enough, but some dumb criminals just have to take it a step further. 25-year-old Valeri Portlock thought he had come up with a foolproof plan for finding new victims to rob. He had equipped his car with lights and an air horn and would pretend to be a police officer to target his victims. His genius plan fell apart when he used his fraudulent police car to pull over a van in Long Island, New York. When Valeri approached the van, the occupants identified themselves. They were all members of the Nassau County Police Department's electronics squad. Realizing he was in deep trouble, Valeri fled the scene, only to be arrested a short time later by local highway patrol officers who had been tipped off by their colleagues. He was charged with criminal impersonation, reckless endangerment, and fleeing the police. Clearly, pretending to be one of them is not something the police take lightly. It may not be quite as bad as impersonating a police officer, but this dumb criminal got what he deserved for pretending to be someone he wasn't. When an Iowa City man realized that his driver's license had been stolen, he was understandably frustrated. After dealing with the inconvenience of replacing it, he went on with his life and thought nothing more of it. That is, until a few months later, when a man showed up at the bar where he worked as a bouncer and presented him with his own ID to attempt to get in. It was an incredible coincidence, and a rare instance of someone getting their stolen license back. Using a fake ID is pretty stupid, but sometimes being honest is just as dumb. In Santa Rosa County, Florida, state troopers pulled over a vehicle for speeding. The car had been traveling more than 25 miles per hour over the speed limit. When officers searched the vehicle, they found a large amount of narcotics including meth, cocaine, fentanyl, and MDMA. What had prompted them to search the car in the first place? The fact that the criminal had stored their drugs out in the open in bags labeled "bag full of drugs." The occupants were arrested on drug charges, and the police made a tongue-in-cheek Facebook post about the drug bust saying, "Note to self, do not traffic your illegal narcotics in bags labeled "bag full of drugs." Our canines can read. This wasn't the first time the police had taken to social media with snarky comments. The Winfield, Missouri Police Department took to social media to warn the public about a potential new scam in which tricky drug dealers would rip off their customers by selling them smaller quantities than what they'd paid for. These dealers would apparently place the drugs on their cell phones, claiming they had a cool new scale app, when they were really just typing numbers into the calculator to dupe their customers. The police graciously invited the gullible purchasers of illegal narcotics to bring their drugs into the police station to be properly weighed. Anyone who falls for that one definitely deserves to get caught. These stories are definitely a good reminder that crime doesn't pay. Although these dumb criminals clearly didn't get the message, at least their stories of harebrained schemes and poorly executed crimes make for a good laugh. Just imagine you've cornered the market on selling knockoff postage stamps. Regular stamps, vintage stamps, stamps for kids, it's all fair game. You're making, well, not tons of money because the stamp market isn't as lucrative as it once was, but you are making a decent profit. The only problem is that the United States Postal Service has caught on to you. Someone sold you out, and now you need to disappear fast. Postal workers already have a reputation for being grumpy, and who can blame them? They work 6 days a week. But you've really made them disgruntled. Fleets of mail trucks and armies of mail satchel-carrying soldiers are all out for your blood. The only way out? Fake your own death. How hard can it be, you think? Faking one's death goes all the way back to the Talmud. This book of Jewish laws dates from around the 5th century AD. It shows that the idea of faking your own death is nothing new. And ever since the mid-1800s when life insurance was introduced to the world, people have been trying to fake their own death to collect on their policies. Faking your own death can be a lucrative business, maybe even more lucrative than selling forged stamps. So you decide to do a little research to find the best way to go about faking your own death. If caught for forging postage stamps, you could be sentenced to 5 years in prison and fined for all the fake stamps. But that'd be nothing compared to what the angry postal workers would do. They'd tie you up, stick stamps all over your entire body, and ship you to the North Pole without a return address. No way, you think. It's way too cold up there with Santa and his reindeer. You've got to disappear for good. What if you faked your own death in a plane crash? It could happen, right? You're out for a flight with your private jet, paid for with counterfeit stamp profits, and you do some research to see if it's been done before. Sure enough, you find a story about a man named Marcus Schrenker who was having all kinds of legal problems. He was stealing from investors and forging signatures at his business. Schrenker took off from an Indiana airport and was flying to Florida when he sent out a distress call. Moments later, reports started coming in of a plane crash near Schrenker's last known location. Schrenker was reported dead, but his body was never found. The police were suspicious because of his legal troubles. They sent detectives to locations where Schrenker had been seen before the crash. Eventually, they found him. He was roasting marshmallows over an open fire at a campground in Florida. Apparently, he had jumped out of the plane after calling in the distress call. He pulled the ripcord on his parachute and gently glided down, watching as his plane crashed. Well, he got caught by the police, so that didn't work out so great for Schrenker, you think. Plus, you kinda want your private jet intact after you fake your own death, so that you can still travel the world. It would do no good if you crashed it and your fastest mode of transportation was consumed in a fiery wreck. Let's try something else. You often go on exotic vacations using funds from your imitation stamp operation and posing as a courier, again something that the Postal Service wants to hunt you down for. They take impersonating a postal worker very seriously. Maybe I can fly into a semi-dangerous country with political unrest, and I can pay someone to claim I've been killed by the rebels. You're full of schemes. You start doing research into faking your own death through being killed by militant rebels. Sure enough, you come across a story about Darwin Subramaniam, a 60-year-old Singaporean businessman. He was being sued by creditors because his rental car business had failed. To escape the debt collector, Subramaniam had his wife claim he had been killed by Tamil Tiger rebels. This allowed her to collect on 3 life insurance policies. After the money was collected, Subramaniam moved to Singapore using a fake passport. Authorities eventually located him and tried him for insurance fraud. It probably would have just been easier to pay off the debt. Death by rebels, fake passports? That's a lot of work, you think? If you're gonna fake die, you want it to be in a little more style and a lot easier. Maybe being killed by rebels is too extravagant. What about faking murder? Yeah, that could work, you muse. Then you find a story about a Music Row attorney named William Grota. He faked his own murder and then posed as his murderer. He parked his car in a rural location and waited a couple of days. Then he phoned the authorities saying he had killed William Grota and where to find the evidence. He must have been laughing to himself as he hung up the payphone, thinking that he had pulled one over on the cops. The police found this series of events just slightly suspicious. Why would the murderer give himself away? Upon investigation and acting on what the murderer said, the police found the possessions of William Grota scattered near a riverbank. It seemed almost too obvious that they were the belongings of William Grota. Every single item had identification with them. They later found and sentenced Grota. He had a $1 million life insurance policy he was getting ready to collect on. Grota probably should have just stuck with being a lawyer instead of faking his murder. Note to self, maybe a murder would work, but don't pose as your own murderer, you say out loud. This fake your own death thing is complicated. It seems that when fake dying, the body, or lack thereof, seems to always be a hiccup in the plan. What if you could make sure that there was no body, and that no one would even expect to find one? What if you could fake your own death by cremation? That's it, you exclaim. You're sure nobody has tried faking their death by cremation before? I mean, it's perfect. There's no body to find, and you just get a bunch of ash and you put it in an urn and you're good to go. You decide to just check real quick to see if anyone could possibly be as brilliant as you are. Then you stumble onto the story of Alfredo Sanchez. Alfredo Sanchez was deep in credit card debt and defaulting on his loans. He and his wife plotted his fake death and cremation. Sanchez's wife called his employer saying he died of a heart attack and had been cremated, as his will had specified. She then began collecting on her late husband's insurance and pension. The company hired an investigator after hearing rumors that Alfredo Sanchez was still alive. They eventually found him living in Australia. The kicker was they discovered him because he had remarried his wife in Australia and was located by the investigator after his wedding day. Haha, good thing I'm not married, you chuckle. But then again, who would you trust enough to lie to everyone that you had died and been cremated? Also, would the police be able to tell if the ash in the urn was from a burnt log instead of a burnt body? This seems very complicated even for a mastermind like you. You ponder other ways to fake your own death. Well, if fire and cremation is too complicated, let's try the opposite. What about faking your death by water? What if you fake the drowning? You dive into research and accounts of people who faked their death by drowning. Those tedious postal workers will never catch you if your body is thought to be at the bottom of the ocean. You come across a few accounts of people who have faked their own death by drowning. John Darwin was claimed to have drowned to death while kayaking. He was facing possible bankruptcy and needed a way out. But there was a breakdown of communication between John and his wife. Apparently, he called her to drop him off at a train station just before she called the police to report him missing from drowning. Later, John Darwin walked into the police station claiming he thought he was just considered a missing person. The police didn't buy it. It's always important to get your story straight when faking your own death. Another faked drowning was of someone of slightly more notoriety. John Stonehouse, a former member of British Parliament, faked his death by drowning so he could start a new life with his mistress. The things we do for love, you think. But this fake drowning gets even more interesting. He was later found in Australia operating under the name Joseph Markham, which was the name of the dead husband of a constituent. Stonehouse was arrested for operating a fraudulent business and served 3 years in jail. When he was released, he immediately married his mistress, who had waited for him to get out of jail. Really, the things we do for love. The craziest part of the whole story is that it was later discovered Stonehouse was a communist spy. What a wild story, you sigh. You're not sure drowning is the best way to fake your own death anymore. What if all those other dark secrets come to light if you get caught? Other than just the forged stamp thing, of course. How about dying of a disease? Faking death by cancer. Well, that'd be messed up because of how terrible the disease is. So messed up it could work. You do a little further research and you find that faking your death by cancer has been tried before. A woman by the name of Alison Matera told her church choir that she was dying of cancer. Of course, the members were devastated and tried to make her as comfortable as possible. When Matera was claimed to be in hospice, the choir members began receiving calls from a woman claiming to be a nurse to give them updates. The odd thing was that the nurse sounded remarkably similar to Allison herself. When they received a call claiming that Allison Matera had died, the caller also sounded very similar to the deceased. It became obvious that something was not quite right when a woman who bore a very close resemblance to Allison was at the funeral. When police confronted Allison Matera, she admitted to faking her own death because she had attachment issues and wanted to drive her choir friends away. That's crazy, not even I would stoop that low, you say. Maybe you're missing something. Maybe there's an easier way to fake your own death and get away with it. I mean, in this age of internet and technology, could you fake your own death with something as simple as a text? Something like a, "Hi USPS, it's me, the guy you're after for selling all those fake stamps. I'm dead, so there's no reason to look for me. Thanks, bye." I mean, is it really that crazy? You use your smartphone to see if it's been done before. Apparently, a woman named Diane Craven texted her boyfriend that she had died. Craven posed as her older brother and told her boyfriend that she had died from a brain aneurysm. But then, 3 months after her supposed passing, Diane's boyfriend saw a picture of her online. Somehow, you feel like texting the postal service that you died probably wouldn't work. Social media makes it really difficult to stay dead if your death was faked. After researching all of those crazy stories about people faking their own death and being caught, you decide it might just be better to turn yourself in. The police would protect you from the United States Postal Service workers, and you head to the authorities to tell them the whole story. They look at you with a shocked expression as you explain your whole counterfeit stamp operation. You tell them it's been a wild ride and that you want to turn over a new leaf. The officer in charge looks at you with a frown, shakes his head and says, "Those people at the Postal Service can be really scary. I mean, they work 6 days a week no matter what the weather is. When they find you, they're going to make your life miserable. You probably should have just faked your own death."
If you pull off this jump, you're going to be the talk of the lunchroom. All you have to do is leap off this bridge and onto a moving train passing under you. It doesn't look that fast. What could go wrong? As it turns out, a lot. A surprising number of people die from doing risky activities, and an even more surprising number die from regular activities that turn out to be deadly. What do they all have in common? These are some more of the dumbest ways to die. Number 10. Eating way too much. If you had to come up with a sport that could only exist today, it's probably competitive eating. Yes, we have enough food that we can watch gustatory gladiators go head-to-head, like when hot dog eating champs Joey Chestnut and Takeru Kobayashi faced off on Netflix, with Chestnut eating a staggering 83 hot dogs in one sitting. But it takes a lot more than gluttony to win these competitions. It takes practice and strategy, as the human body is not meant to eat that much food in one go. And that's something a lot of people have found out the hard way. At least 10 people have died during eating competitions, with most of them being amateurs who didn't know how to pace themselves and wound up tragically choking to death. In some cases, it was the fault of the food. Marshmallows are one of the last foods that should be used in a speed eating competition. Same for hot dogs, which can easily get stuck if not chewed properly. But other culprits have included tacos, pancakes, pie, and Kentucky Fried Chicken. And as for the man who died in 2012 during a roach and worm eating competition, well, those roach legs weren't meant to go down there. Yum. But speed eating is far from the only way you could die from eating. One man didn't even get to enjoy his burger. Number 9. Too much DIY. Barry Griffiths was an independent man, and the 57-year-old Welshman wasn't willing to let health setbacks stop him. He'd recently suffered a stroke, which limited mobility in his arm, and he also suffered from heart disease. But he didn't want help or company, living by himself and preparing his own food. One day he set out to make himself some burgers from frozen patties, but the burgers were stuck together. No worries, he pulled out a knife and began prying them apart one by one. The exact circumstances of what came next would never be known, because Mr. Griffiths wasn't found until a welfare check was called in to his country home, at which point officers found him lying dead with a wound to his abdomen. At some point, the knife likely slipped and stabbed him, at which point, rather than seeking medical help, he simply got into bed and tried to sleep it off, but never woke up. Coroners could not confirm whether the cause of death was the heart disease or the stab wound, but the latter could not have helped. But it's not just eating animals that could have unfortunate consequences. Not even man's best friend is innocent. Number 8. That's not on the dog. 30-year-old Joseph Smith was a good old boy in Sumner County, Kansas, and he was looking forward to a day of hunting. He and his friend had everything they needed: their hunting rifles, a truck, and his friend's loyal German Shepherd. They loaded the dog and the guns into the back seat and set out for the woods to bag some deer. And somewhere along the way, the dog got excited and stepped on the trigger, causing it to go off and shoot Smith directly in the back, killing him. Not exactly a man's best friend action. But dog lovers across the country jumped to the defense of the dog. After all, dogs don't know what a gun is, and it had no bad intentions, and the authorities agreed. They immediately pointed out that putting a dog and a loaded weapon in the same area is a recipe for disaster. While no charges were filed in the case, it gained national attention, and it served as a key point of evidence for those who believe man's best friend belongs in the front seat. It's rarely the animal's fault, but sometimes you have to wonder, what did they expect? Number 7. A bird-brained decision. Marvin Hayos was a 77-year-old Florida man, and he certainly lived up to the reputation. The eccentric farm owner loved to collect exotic animals, and he had recently obtained a prized specimen for his collection, a cassowary. These flightless oceanic birds have a reputation for being aggressive and territorial. In fact, many people have said they're the closest living thing to a velociraptor today, thanks to their sharp talons and confrontational behavior. What could go wrong? For Mr. Hayos, a lot. The large bird was none too pleased to find itself in captivity, and when Mr. Hayos was in the bird's enclosure, he apparently fell, and the cassowary wasted no time. It set upon its new owner, kicking him repeatedly until it punctured a key artery with its sharp 3-clawed foot. Marvin Hayos bled out and was pronounced dead on the scene, and authorities warned that the cassowary was the most dangerous bird in the world before auctioning off this particular murder bird to a new owner. Let's hope no sequel is forthcoming. Sports always have a risk to them, but one sport is turning out to be surprisingly deadly. Number 6. The cutting edge. Hockey is one of the most dangerous sports, which makes sense when you think about it. It's a sport played on ice where armored guys collide into each other while holding big sticks, and they try to send a hard, flat puck flying into the net at top speed. And that's before you get into all the fights. But there's another element that's only getting attention now. They're doing it all with razor blades attached to their boots. And that proved to be the undoing of Adam Johnson, a pro hockey player who was playing in England in 2023 when he was the victim of a freak accident. While Johnson was playing against the Sheffield Steelers, he fell on the ice, and the Steelers player Matt Petgrave kicked up toward him, the blade of his skate cutting Johnson's neck. Johnson collapsed and bled out on the ice, and a manslaughter arrest would later be made, something very rare in an on-field sports incident. But this wasn't the only case like this. A year earlier, a teenage boy in Connecticut would die in a similar incident in a high school hockey game, with this one being ruled a complete accident. Maybe ice blade sports have just a certain level of lethal risk. Teenage rebellion can have deadly consequences, even for royals. Number 5. Fire in the hole. Archduchess Matilda Marie Adelgunda Alexandria of Austria, that's a mouthful, seemed to live a charmed life. The third child of Archduke Albert of Vienna and Princess Hildegard of Bavaria. She grew up in the mid-19th century and was expected to be key to her family's plan to grow its influence. She was designated to marry Prince Umberto of Savoy, the crown prince of Italy, to boost relations between the two. And her father wanted everything to be perfect. That meant that his daughter must give off the impression of a proper young lady. And one act of rebellion would spell the princess's doom. On the 6th of June, 1867, Archduchess Matilda was planning to attend a performance at the theater, wearing a gauze dress that she'd picked out. She stepped outside to smoke, something that was strictly forbidden by her father. She heard her father approach, impulsively hid the cigarette behind her dress, and the dress went up like a bonfire. She was covered with burns and died soon after from her injuries, putting an end not just to her life, but to the country's hopes of improved relations with Italy for now. Number 4. The Old Man is Snoring. The Old Man is Snoring is one of those nursery rhymes that's a little too morbid, a song about an old man who hits his head and dies in his sleep. But it's not artistic license either. It is believed that falling out of bed is one of the most surprisingly common causes of injury and death, with up to 20,000 people suffering injuries each year and several hundred dying in the United States alone. So what about our beds is so deadly? In a word, nothing. When we're likely to fall out of bed, we've either just woken up or we're still asleep tossing and turning in a dream. That impacts our response time, which can be deadly. After all, you're not falling from a high distance, but a few feet can be all that matters if you hit the wrong point. A head injury can not only be fatal, but hard to detect. That's what happened to famous funny man Bob Saget, who hit his head in the shower, went to sleep and never woke up. Likewise, falling the wrong way and breaking a neck is possible if you go head first. So maybe the best approach is to invest in a king-size bed. This next entry is the definition of making a bad choice in the heat of the moment. Number 3. Out of the frying pan, into the fire. Brazil is one of the most biodiverse regions in the world, mostly due to the Amazon rainforest. Unfortunately, not all the residents are always friendly, as one 30-year-old man in Brasilândia de Minas in the south of the country found out. He was fishing with some friends at a lake when they were set upon by a swarm of bees. Being stung dozens of times, they jumped into the lake to escape the angry bugs, only to make a horrifying discovery. They were not alone in the lake, and the other residents were hungry. Yes, the lake was filled with some of South America's most feared residents, piranhas. While the carnivorous fish aren't the razor-filled monsters movies like to portray them as, they are attracted to blood and open wounds, and dozens of bee stings would qualify. While 2 of the men managed to swim away safely, one was likely overcome by a combination of the pain and the water and became a fish buffet. He was found 4 meters from shore, partially eaten by the piranha. Looks like the fish won this round. Maybe being a spectator is safer, but not always. Number 2. Worst game ever. Sporting events are always a big draw, as anyone who's ever tried to get tickets to the Super Bowl knows. That was already the case in 1900, when Stanford and UC Berkeley were about to play their annual Thanksgiving game. The game attracted thousands of people, many of whom didn't want to pay the hefty $1 admission fee, so some got a bright idea to climb up on the roof of a nearby glass-blowing factory to get a view from there. Soon, people were crowded on the roof. The game kicked off around 2:30, and it's believed over 500 people gathered on the roof. The police tried to restore order, but failed, and after 20 minutes the roof gave way, sending the massive crowd tumbling into a furnace below. Only one furnace was active that day, but it was filled with molten glass, and up to 100 people fell on top of it, being horribly burned. Thankfully, the furnace held and didn't pour the molten glass onto the victims, but fuel pipes were broken, spraying hot oil and setting fires. In total, 23 people were killed and over 100 were injured. It remains the worst disaster in U.S. sporting event history. Oh, and the game went on. Stanford won. But that was a horrible one-time event. This final cause keeps on happening. Number 1. Surf's Up. Remember when we asked what's the worst thing that could happen to those who go subway surfing? Turns out the answer is a lot. Subway surfing is a reckless, illegal, and popular stunt pulled off by teenagers and graffiti artists in major cities, where they try to jump onto a moving train. Why? Some want to show off for their friends, some want to pull off a stunt for social media, and others want to put a graffiti tag on a hard-to-reach area. What they all have in common is that they are taking their lives in their hands, because trains are not meant to be ridden on the outside. It's not exactly known how many people have died train surfing over the years, but the Wikipedia page has hundreds listed. The most common cause of death is falling off of the train, but other victims have hit their heads on overpasses, gotten caught between cars, or hit electrified rails. The good news is, this one is fairly easy to avoid. All we have to do is not jump on a moving train.
With the beauty of hindsight, sometimes we can look back on the colorful, rich tapestry of our lives and admit, with fondness, our dumbest mistakes. That has to be the case with the gallery of rogues we bring to your attention today. From the groom who called in a bomb threat on his wedding day, to the burglar who forgot to log off of Facebook in his victim's house, all these people have one thing in common. They got busted for a silly mistake. Let's take a look at these hapless criminals and find out why a career in crime just isn't for everyone in this episode of the Infographic Show, Top 10 Dumbest Reasons People Were Arrested and Thrown in Jail. Neil McCarty, for reasons known only to himself, didn't get around to booking the reception venue for his big wedding day and simply didn't have what it takes to tell his bride-to-be about his oversight. Instead, he panicked before deciding to cover up his mistake by phoning in a hoax bomb threat on that special day. Authorities didn't see the humor in this, and McCarty was handed a 12-month sentence. In a matter of minutes, this lovebird turned into a jailbird. Gary Harrington from rural Oregon was arrested and sentenced to 30 days in jail for collecting rainwater into 3 barrels on his own property. The state of Oregon had him arrested on the charge of stockpiling illegal reservoirs. Just wow. The water that falls from the sky onto his property is owned, according to the state of Oregon, by the Medford Water Commission. This was dumb on Mr. Herring's part, to be fair, but the charge is so bizarre it simply had to have a place on our list. Ghost impersonator Anthony Stallard was arrested for hanging out at a cemetery and disturbing mourners in Portsmouth, England. It is unknown whether Mr. Stallard used the standard white sheet for his ghostly impression, but it is understood that he was heavily intoxicated with alcohol during his terrifying and yes, spirited performance. Suzanne Hulvert and Carl Owen Smith began arguing in an LA Taco Bell restaurant. Things became heated as Hulvert smacked Smith around the back of the head with a Taco Bell Supreme burrito. Smith responded by stabbing his significant other with a plastic fork before fleeing to a nearby bar to drown his sorrows. The pair were both arrested and booked for what was essentially a heated food fight. A homeless woman in Florida was arrested and charged with disorderly conduct and dancing in a vulgar manner in Lake County in 2016. Turns out the woman was just a hapless victim of the current twerking craze and was no doubt honing her technique. It was simply unfortunate that a bus full of school kids happened to be passing at the time and were not so impressed by the twerking vagrant shaking her ass to the morning traffic. Nicholas Wigg decided to update his Facebook status while burglarizing a house. All well and good, but he probably should have logged off before leaving his victim's house. Police had no problem tracking the dim-witted criminal down. In fact, it was probably the easiest crime they'd ever solved. Since being locked up in jail, Nicholas's relationship status is listed as complicated. In 2014, a woman was arrested in Gainesville, Georgia, after police suspected a spoon found in her car had residue of methamphetamine on it. The woman explained that the spoon contained hardened residue of some spaghetti hoops that she'd eaten in the car a month before. But the cops weren't buying it. She spent a month behind bars before the lab results confirmed her story was true. A Colorado woman was arrested for trying to break into jail. Monique Deshawn Armstrong thought she'd break in to rescue her brother. She made it past a razor wire fence surrounding Mesa County Jail, and once inside, demanded the release of her sibling. We assume that it's harder to break out of jail than to break in, and we guess Miss Armstrong will find out for herself. In March 2012, Kansas man Brian Paul Smith was sentenced to 4.5 years after holding his neighbor's pet spider hostage. Smith had been looking after the neighbor's spider and had become rather attached to it. When the victim asked for the spider back, Smith made demands for money. The demands turned to threats, with Smith wanting to keep the spider and receive $100, otherwise he'd shoot his victim. The victim called the police, who eventually unraveled the sticky web of Smith's bizarre social life and had him arrested. Lori Teal from New Mexico spent the night in jail for an overdue library book. She checked out the Twilight book from her local library and promptly forgot about it. She was arrested in front of her kids at home, handcuffed, and marched to the police station for processing. Not only is she being charged for crimes against public services, she's also being questioned for crimes against literature.
The world's richest man once spent $1 million on a car that couldn't drive. But that's just the tip of the iceberg for the insane ways Elon Musk spends his billions. One major expenditure for Musk was $100 million in residential property in California. Most of these homes were in the LA area, and at one time he owned 7 separate homes. His first piece of property was a Bel Air home that he'd been renting for 2 years, which he ended up buying for $17 million in 2012. It's a modest 20,248 square feet and has 7 bathrooms and a 2-story library with a pool and a tennis court in the backyard. The property also includes an on-site gym and expansive wine cellar. The property ended up being sold off in 2020 for $29 million, earning Musk a small profit. On the same street as his massive mansion, Musk also bought a more humble home for $6.75 million in October of 2013. Famous actor Gene Wilder lived there in the 2,756 square foot home for over 30 years, until leaving it in 2007. Musk didn't actually live at the home though, instead using the 3-bedroom home as a private schoolhouse for his children, which he described as a little schoolhouse on the prairie, except for in Bel Air on a golf course. After pledging to get rid of his properties though, Musk put the home on the market for $9.5 million in May 2020, but any buyers had to promise not to tear the home down or make any major modifications. It would end up going for $7 million to Elizabeth Hunter, who is married to Gene Wilder's nephew, and it's rumored that Musk himself lent the couple most of the money to buy it. Then in 2015 and 2016, Musk bought 3 more Bel Air mansions, a ranch home for $20 million, an unfinished mansion for $24.25 million, and another mansion for $4.3 million. But apparently he didn't spend any time there, as the neighbors told reporters that nobody was ever present on the property. On top of those 3 costly properties, Musk also bought another 2-story home for an estimated $4.2 million, also in Bel Air. He must really love the Fresh Prince. In 2020, all these properties worth about $62.2 million ended up being sold, yet again cutting Musk a tidy little profit. Hopping over to Brentwood, California, Musk bought a home with his ex-wife for $3.7 million in 2014, but it sold for $4 million in 2019. Musk's final home, though, is in San Francisco, and it's a 100-year-old 16,000 square foot mansion with 10 bedrooms, its own hiking trails, and a full-blown ballroom. Musk bought it for $23.4 million in 2017 and listed it for $35 million in 2020 as part of his pledge to dump all his properties and live more simply. Real estate may have been one of Musk's passions, but anyone who's ever driven a Tesla knows that the man absolutely loves cars. In 2013, Musk bought one of the Lotus Esprit cars used by James Bond in The Spy Who Loved Me. He paid almost $1 million for the car, though the car apparently cannot be physically driven. That's because this was the vehicle specially modified for filming the underwater scenes. Instead, it has a bank of 4 propellers in the rear of the vehicle and a watertight compartment with an electric motor to power them. It even has fins on the side which can be used to steer it while underwater. During filming, a former Navy SEAL actually drove the vehicle while wearing full scuba gear, as the car's interior is not watertight. Incredibly, the car that Musk paid $1 million for was accidentally discovered by a building contractor who had bought a storage unit for just $100 and found the dilapidated vehicle within. After discovering what it used to be, they carefully restored it, earning themselves an almost $1 million payday. Oh, and if the car looks familiar to you, and it should, because Musk admitted that it served to inspire his famous Cybertruck. Musk also acquired a Porsche 911, an original Ford Model T, a Jaguar E-Type Series 1 Roadster, an Audi Q7, a Hamann B&W M5, and a McLaren F1. Famously, Musk ended up completely totaling his F1 as he lost control of the 627 horsepower monster while driving a friend to a meeting. According to Musk, as the duo was driving, his friend asked him to really show him what the car could do, to which Musk replied, "Watch this." What his friend ended up witnessing was Musk punching the accelerator, completely losing control of the massively powerful vehicle, spinning out of control and smashing into an embankment. Miraculously, no one was injured, but the car was totaled. Prophetically, Musk said that he'd often heard about individuals becoming rich, buying fancy sports cars, and immediately wrecking them, but he was sure he'd never be that guy, so he didn't even bother to get the car insured. Ultimately, Musk took a $1 million wash as the F1 got junked. But if you're looking for outlandish expenses on rich people hobbies, prepare to be disappointed. Because by Musk's own admission, he doesn't have many hobbies. Instead, he prefers to read, play video games, and spend his time on Twitter. Admittedly, probably too much time. As far as lavish vacations, Musk doesn't seem to take many, famously doing an annual camping vacation with his children and barely taking a day off from work otherwise. Where Musk has spent most of his money has been with his 2 babies, SpaceX and Tesla. Musk stated his goal is to build a Mars city, a second home for humanity that can eventually be self-sustaining, and an insurance policy for life back here on Earth. In a bid to do just that, Musk has spent undisclosed millions of his own private wealth on keeping SpaceX funded and alive during its troubling first few years. He's since directed much of his efforts toward 2 major world-changing projects within SpaceX, Starship One and Starlink. Musk's reusable rockets have revolutionized spaceflight and made SpaceX the most successful private space company in the world. They've dramatically cut down the launch costs and sped up launch schedules. But if humanity is going to move the stars, even Musk's Falcon rockets aren't enough. Enter Starship, a rocket that's not just massive but truly reusable. This huge rocket, reminiscent of something from the 1950s science fiction, is even bigger than the Saturn V that took man to the moon. At the very top is the spaceship itself, capable of carrying up to 110 tons into orbit. The bottom is a super heavy rocket that will be able to launch the vehicle. Unlike other SpaceX rockets, though, the entire system is meant to be reusable, with the actual vehicle also capable of returning to Earth and landing like a jetliner. The scope of the Starship is incredibly ambitious, and to date, prototypes have successfully landed, but only after flying as high as 500 feet. The next major project Musk has personally spent millions funding is Starlink, a constellation network made up of hundreds of satellites. Starlink is meant to bring global internet access to the entire world. Currently, Starlink will cost you $500 to pre-order the hardware needed and has a monthly charge of $99 once the service goes live. While this may cost more than standard internet providers, Starlink differs in that just a few years' time, Musk vows you'll be able to use your Starlink service literally anywhere on the globe, providing a low-latency, high-speed internet connection across every square inch of planet Earth. Tesla is another cash cow for Musk, but for a long time it was a cash black hole. It's well known that in the early days, Musk was pouring much of his own money into the company, relying on friends for loans just to live day to day. How much he poured into the company is unknown, but we can say for certain that he's made a lot of profit on his initial investments. Musk has also redirected much of his personal wealth to the Boring Company and Neuralink. The Boring Company is committed to creating underground infrastructure that seeks to solve the problems of traffic congestion and connect cities with very high-speed railways. It's yet another moonshot from the person who may be the most ambitious man in the modern age, but it's also very likely to have a profound payoff in time. Right now, the company is still privately owned and largely working on developing its own tech, but it's already successfully built the Las Vegas Convention Center Loop, cutting down a walking trip from one end of the convention center campus that used to take 25 minutes to a 2-minute ride. Neuralink is focused on creating high-bandwidth connections between computers and the human brain, a technology that will absolutely revolutionize the world if successful. Musk has sunk $100 million into the company, and it's known that the Department of Defense is a major supporter and very interested in the technology the company is attempting to develop. On a more selfless note, some of Musk's biggest expenditures have actually been in the field of charity. In 2018, he'd given just under $100 million to various charities, and when he became the world's wealthiest man, he immediately began a philanthropic spending spree. Back in the fall of 2020, he took Feeding Texas, a charity committed to ending hunger in Texas, completely by surprise after responding to one of their tweets asking for COVID relief aid and giving them $100,000. Then, when winter storms hit Texas and took out its power infrastructure, the organization reached out, and this time Musk gave them an additional $1 million. According to the head of Feeding Texas, Celia Cole, it was a quick ask and a quick yes. Musk also pledged to give the city of Brownsville, Texas, $30 million after choosing it as a site for a SpaceX facility. The pledge came as a surprise to the mayor of the city, and while the donation hasn't been given yet, the mayor has put a team together on how to spend the money per Musk's request. The $30 million figure includes $20 million for education and $10 million for revitalizing the city's downtown area, which will hopefully bring in more visitors and business for locals. Musk has also given $5 million to Khan Academy, a platform for online courses, and another $5 million to 2 Boston researchers studying the coronavirus. He's also given an undisclosed amount to a fund meant to help bring internet access to the developing world. His biggest charitable expense, though, is a $100 million prize known as X Prize for a competition meant to discover solutions to capture and permanently lock away carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. The competition is expected to last 4 years, with the best, most feasible technology presented, awarding its inventors $1/10 billion to kickstart their operation. Critics point out that so far Musk has given less than 1% of his wealth, but Musk has promised that that will change and that the world shouldn't expect his biggest charitable contributions until later in life. That's because his businesses are relatively new, and if he were to sell off Tesla or SpaceX stock to fund charitable giving in huge amounts right now, it would end up bankrupting both companies and losing many people their jobs. He's signed on to the Giving Pledge, an international agreement amongst the world's wealthiest individuals to give away most of their wealth before their deaths. When it comes to spending money, Musk is kind of a boring guy, preferring instead to invest money in creating more revolutionary technologies and companies than taking typical rich people vacations to faraway islands where hunting man is legal. Musk's continued reinvestment of his money into companies that could reshape human society may ensure his continued reign atop the throne of the world's richest man. And one day, given his pledge to give most of his wealth to charity, he could also take the crown of the most charitable man in history. You've heard of Florida Man, but you've never encountered his even wilder cousin. Get ready to meet Texas Man, who has all of Florida Man's crazy, but in a much bigger hat. And these are some of Texas Man's most notorious exploits and dumbest arrests. The people of Smith County were lining up to do a civic duty few were excited about: jury duty. But one man apparently wanted to take the edge off his little chore a bit more than the rest. Instead of bringing a book or trying to keep up on work while in the waiting room, he loaded up on something else before arriving: booze. Taylor Huckabee showed up at the courthouse, and it was clear to everyone he was drunk, slurring his words and stumbling around. He was even carrying a cup of beer when the authorities approached him. He was charged with public intoxication and spent his day at the courthouse in a cell. But he didn't have the worst choice of where to get drunk. Suzette Meir Gordon became a notorious Texas woman when she showed up to Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport in 2017. The 52-year-old drank several glasses of wine when she was waiting for her flight and was already a little drunk when she stumbled on board. But she wasn't done. As soon as the flight was in the air, she demanded another alcoholic beverage. When the flight attendant refused the drunk woman's order, Gordon slapped her, started yelling that she was an important person, and ran out of her seat to bang on the cockpit door to demand to speak to the pilot. The whole flight was diverted back to Dallas, and Gordon was soon asking to speak to the manager of the local jail. This next Texas woman was driven by something other than alcohol. In the city of Leander, Texas, police weren't expecting many calls in the middle of the night, but then they got a frenzied call from a private home. Someone had broken in. What they found was bizarre. It wasn't a standard burglar, but an older woman who had broken in and begun beating a boy with a stick. Sarah Arnada snuck into the home, found the boy sleeping on the couch, and began whacking him while yelling voodoo curses. She apparently asked him who else was in the house, but police weren't able to get much more out of the confused woman. The boy was uninjured, and nothing was taken from the house. So whatever Miss Arnada was after, it was going to remain a mystery. Age is no barrier for Texas men and women. No one likes rude drivers, and it's even worse when the jerks curse you out after cutting you off. And 76-year-old Jay Brumbaugh had had enough. When a couple passed him on the road and made an obscene gesture out the window, he gave chase and decided to escalate it with a handgun he had in the car. The younger drivers had been tired of Brumbaugh's slow driving, but they weren't expecting him to shoot at their car after they flipped him the bird. The drivers were uninjured, and eventually police tracked down Brumbaugh and charged him with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. The other inmates should probably steer clear of him. It takes some guts to be a criminal, but it doesn't take smarts. Chiriaco Balmaceda and his criminal friend had a simple plan. They would break into a Houston area home and rob it. But they weren't planning to be confronted by an armed homeowner who fended off the trio of robbers and sent them running. But at least they got away scot-free, right? Not exactly. In his panic, Chiriaco left his backpack behind, and with it a bunch of identifying documents. The resident, who is now one of the few robbery victims to end the day with more belongings, sent a picture of Balmaceda's school ID to the police. The police tracked him down and gave him an unwanted birthday present: burglary charges. Of course, being smart and educated is no guarantee of good sense. It was a pretty standard case. An angry man had assaulted a family member with a lacrosse stick and then went on to do some more costly revenge, causing $10,000 of damage to a Porsche. The police quickly arrested him and charged him with assault and destruction of property. But what shocked people was the culprit's identity. It was David Park Mason, a chief of thoracic surgery and one of the best lung transplant surgeons in the country. What caused a renowned and educated doctor to suddenly start acting like a petty criminal? No one knows, but his patients are likely to breathe a sigh of relief that he didn't lose his temper mid-surgery. Temper is a common downfall of Texas man, but few had the bad judgment of this next criminal. John L. Eels had a lifelong hatred for cops, and it hadn't dissipated by the time he was 70 years old. And he apparently thought that it meant he didn't have to obey any laws, or at least the ones about drunk driving. He was already drunk when he was behind the wheel in 2017 when he saw an officer directing traffic in Fort Bend. Instead of swerving out of the way, he deliberately swerved toward the officer, made an obscene gesture, and clipped Detective Cavillo with his vehicle. Cavillo was only lightly injured and was able to give chase and quickly arrested Eels. Shocking everyone, Eels was not normally a law-abiding citizen. It was at least his third DWI. We all hate this next annoyance, but this next Texas man took it a bit too far. No solicitors. You put that sign outside your house, but does it stop the window replacement guys, the Bible salesman, or the Girl Scouts? Well, maybe the Girl Scouts are okay, but it's enough to make a sensible person turn out the lights and pretend they're not home. But Radu Shivu was not a sensible person. When a roofing salesman ignored the sign and knocked on the door, Shivu opened up and proceeded to shoot the salesman with a handgun. Shivu insisted he was justified because the salesman was warned by the sign, but the police disagreed. The salesman was taken to the hospital, and Shivu was charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and taken to jail, where no salesman will bother him. This next criminal may not have thought this plan through. When police got a call from Alan Dwayne Thomas, they were on high alert. The Weatherford man claimed to have shot 2 people and stated that others were in his home. But when police got to the house, there was no sign of any home invaders, alive or dead. There was only Thomas, armed and lurking in his home. Police believed it was an attempt to ambush police officers for unknown reasons, but if that was Thomas's goal, he wasn't very good at it. The confused criminal kept yelling at the officers to come inside and get him. Ultimately, they were able to get the drop on him, and the would-be police hunter was arrested without ever firing a shot. This Texas man had a slightly inflamed opinion of himself. Omar Alanis had a position of responsibility. He was a high school history teacher, but despite only working in his current position for a few months, he decided he was worth more. A lot more, in fact. He wanted something he described as the master teacher salary. He proceeded to send email demands to his principal and school administrators that included threats that if they didn't want to burn alive, they would give it to him. He even seemed to think it would be the Dallas PD that killed his co-workers. He wasn't smart about it. He sent the emails from his school email and went on the run after the emails became public. After a week, the terrible teacher came out of hiding and was arrested for terroristic threats. This next man made a boast he couldn't back up. Denton, Texas residents were startled when a man was seen wandering around the town, confused and his face smeared with dark material. When people tried to confront him and find out if he was okay, he would only say one thing: "I am the law." To no one's surprise, he wasn't actually the law, and the police showed up soon enough. They arrested the man, identified as Joseph Augustini, for public intoxication and found drug-related items on his body. The whole time, he claimed to be a member of the cops and even told the cops that they should draw their guns or it wouldn't be a fair fight. Let's hope he didn't tell anyone at the jail he was the law. Sometimes to stop a Texas woman, it takes another Texas woman. A San Antonio 7-Eleven clerk was having a bad day. She was dealing with a hostile customer, and the rude woman would not go away. She kept approaching the counter and heckling the worker and simply refused to leave when ordered. And the clerk had had enough. She came out from behind the counter and proceeded to get into a fight in the middle of the store. As a local social media hound filmed the encounter and egged them on, the clerk eventually put the troublemaker in a headlock before the woman wriggled free and left the store in a hurry. The clerk called the police to report the customer and the footage went viral. No one knows if the culprit was ever caught for trespassing, but it's likely she didn't try that behavior at another store next time. This next crook had an unusual cover story. It was 2019 and the 2020 presidential election was ramping up. One of the hopefuls was fresh-faced Texas Congressman Beto O'Rourke, who was in the race for about 15 minutes. But James Bradford Gibbon II saw an opportunity. The criminal posed as an O'Rourke campaign worker when a neighbor saw him casing a house and then proceeded to break into the house. The quarry he wound up stealing? A popsicle. That turned out to be a very costly, frosty treat, as he was charged with felony burglary. The campaign confirmed Gibbon never worked for them, and this is probably not an endorsement Beto O'Rourke will be advertising in his next race. Texas car chases are notorious, but this one had an unexpected twist. When police confronted 45-year-old Alan Bade outside the convenience store and tried to arrest him, it wasn't shocking when the wanted man jumped on his vehicle and tried to get away. But in this case, the vehicle was a John Deere tractor. Bade had been driving his tractor all around town, even rear-ending another car. And when the police were after him, he didn't stop, not even when an officer tried to jump on the tractor and grab him. The officer fell off and injured his shoulder, and Bade's slow-motion chase continued until officers cornered him in a field. Bade was charged with aggravated assault of a peace officer and will assume someone else will have to plow his fields. They say never miss an opportunity to promote yourself, but this guy took that a little far. The police have been searching for Taryn Larry Bowie for a while. The San Antonio man was wanted for the shooting of 2 teenagers in a car wash, and when the police finally got to him, they perp-walked him in front of news cameras. This is usually a humiliation, but Bowie saw an opportunity. As he walked by the cameras, he yelled out his YouTube and SoundCloud accounts. A big promotion, but the problem is he probably won't be around to update them for a while. And the reason for the tech-savvy shooter's crime? A dispute with the teenagers over the sale of an Xbox. 2020 changed everything, but it didn't give everyone more common sense. As the pandemic settled in, schools everywhere shifted to virtual learning, with most classes being conducted live on Zoom. That led to a high learning curve and, for an Edison High School teacher, some unexpected harassment. She was teaching an art class when one of her students decided to start making some lewd gestures at the screen. He even took his shirt off and asked her harassing questions. A couple of other boys decided to jump in, and then the entire class devolved into a group of teenagers harassing their teacher. She reported it to the school district, and both the administration and local authorities were looking into the case of the lewd schoolboys. But sometimes it's the teachers who show some bad judgment. Rose Rodriguez-Rabin was a former English teacher at the University of Texas at San Antonio, but she had a highly illegal second job. She was charged by federal authorities with being part of a complex digital network selling drugs, led by organizer Varun Prasad. There was just one problem with the scheme: the drugs weren't even real. Most of them were claimed to be Adderall and Xanax, prescription pills designed to help people focus. In fact, they were mostly fake pills laced with harder drugs that could have been dangerous. The bad teacher was facing serious federal drug charges, and the students of her former college were a little bit safer. Texas men commit a lot of crimes, but sometimes the Texas men fight back. Hot Joy was one of the most popular restaurants in San Antonio, serving a popular Asian fusion menu. It was also famous for its colorful owner, Chad Carey, who was notorious for his brash social media personality. So when a burglar broke into the restaurant after hours and was caught on camera, Carey didn't disappoint.
He wanted the guy caught and made some unique threats. He challenged his fans to find the hapless criminal and vowed to cover him in crab fat caramel and beat him with frozen chicken wings. It's not clear if the burglar was ever caught, but maybe he should turn himself in before Carrie and his friends find him. We've all had a snack attack, but few take it this far. San Antonio loves its Whataburger, and the popular chain can have long lines at the drive-in. But Andrea Santarelli wasn't willing to wait, and the hangry young driver decided she should get to cut the line. As a hapless woman was waiting for her turn, she noticed Santarelli trying to swerve around the rest of the line, and then collided directly with the woman's car. This would have been a ticket and some points on her insurance, except that Santarelli then got angry and accused the stationary victim's car of hitting her. She got out of her car and started harassing the woman and damaging her car. Santarelli fled before the police got there, but was tracked down and arrested. She did over $2,000 in damage to the vehicle, a very costly burger run. You've heard of Grand Theft Auto, but how about Grand Theft Donkey? Alina Berlanga was a respected woman serving on the Floresville, Texas school board. She was also an animal lover, and when she heard an animal in distress, she had to interfere. It didn't matter that the animal was a donkey or that it was in labor. She and her two accomplices heard the donkey, broke off a lock on a gate to get to it, drove the purloined donkey to a nearby vet. Sadly, the donkey's foal died when being born, and the donkey's angry owner wanted Berlanga charged with stealing his valuable animal. Berlanga was charged with misdemeanors, but defended her actions by saying she was rescuing an animal in need. She loved animals. But this next Texas woman didn't respect anything. It was a crowded day in traffic near the Houston National Veterans Cemetery, as everyone was coming to watch a ceremonial flyover to commemorate VE Day. One woman was determined not to miss the event, but completely missed the point of the day in the process. When she was tired of waiting in traffic, she pulled to the side of the road and started driving on the grass instead, cutting through the cemetery and running over multiple gravestones in the process. Onlookers were horrified and filmed her, with many likely taking down her license plate. It's not clear if she was arrested, but she might have bigger problems if she's a believer in disturbed spirits. This next guy would not admit he dealt it, no matter who smelt it. Christopher Ragsdale was having a quiet night at home with his girlfriend, but there was one problem. He was particularly gassy. After he let out a particularly ripe one, his girlfriend couldn't take it anymore and commented that his fart smelled horrible. So he reacted in a completely proportional way, headbutting her and trying to drag her outside. The boorish beefer had the police called on him, and they charged him with domestic violence. He should probably stay away from the beans when it's time for dinner in jail. This next con was anything but a master of stealth. Carmelo de Leon was driving along when he ran a red light, and he was quickly stopped by a police officer. It would have been a standard moving violation ticket, but de Leon stunk of marijuana, and the officer asked him if he had any in the car. De Leon had a sudden burst of honesty, maybe spurred on by the weed, and admitted it. He hadn't exactly hidden it in a smart place. There was over 100 grams stuffed inside a bag of Cheetos. That's one way to combine weed and the ensuing munchies, but it's not exactly helpful if you're trying to keep your drugs hidden. This next Texas criminal is not a candidate for Mother of the Year. It was night at the Sonic Drive-In, and an employee was bringing a bag of food to Monica Michelle Logan. But when the car hop delivered the food, Logan suddenly pulled out a gun. She demanded the attendant hand over all the money she had in her apron or she would shoot. And after getting the cash, Logan drove off. But the attendant noticed something disturbing. There were 2 sleeping babies in the back of the getaway car. When Logan was eventually tracked down, she admitted to robbing the drive-in with 2 kids under 2 in the back seat. And police tacked on 2 charges of endangering a child to the robbery charges. One Texas man didn't have great coping techniques. Bexar County firefighters were busy in early 2020 when a series of mysterious fires broke out in local homes. The first house was abandoned and there was evidence of arson, but the second home had something disturbing in it. A 21-year-old man sitting inside the house as it burned. They dragged him outside, and Marco Martinez admitted to setting the fires, including the one he almost died in. When he was found to be a gang member, Martinez gave the officers a bizarre reason for the arson. He said it helped to relieve his stress. This next woman had a less destructive way to relieve her stress. Visitors to the Wichita Falls Walmart came across something very unusual: an older woman zooming around the store's parking lot on the electronic shopping cart. But it wasn't the cart that was noticeable. It was that she was probably Texas's slowest drunk driver. As she drove, she took sips of wine from a liquid-filled Pringles can. Police were eventually called due to disruption and tracked the woman down at a local restaurant. While they didn't arrest her, probably because store scooters don't count as vehicles for DWI purposes, she was banned from the store and will have to get her next Pringles can elsewhere. This next Texas woman decided to one-up the Sonic robber. A man drove his silver Nissan Rogue on what he expected was a meetup with a woman, but what he found was anything but. The woman was there, and she had 5 kids with her, but this wasn't an unexpected babysitting job. She pulled out a gun and demanded he turn over the car, which he did. She then proceeded to load her kids up into the car and drive off, and was still at large at the last report. While it's no comfort to the man who was robbed, we hope she at least buckled the kids up before driving off. One Texas man didn't really think this whole thing through. Sean Taylor was having a great time drinking one night, maybe a little too much. As the night went on, the bar kept serving him more than he could afford and his tab kept growing. When he realized, he accused the bar of overcharging him and decided he would get the police involved. But he didn't just make the call to the authorities, he spent the entire evening spamming police lines and 911 with calls and texts. His messages got increasingly rude and angry as the night went on, and the constant flow of texts wound up jamming the system. He was eventually arrested for misusing the 911 service and has hopefully dried out since then. This criminal took some famous inspiration. When Christopher Fuentes burst into a dry cleaning store and threatened the employees as he robbed them, he made sure he'd be memorable. The crook had painted his face with white paint, which led the employees telling the police he looked like the Joker. But once he wipes the paint off, he'd be much harder to find, right? Not exactly, because a month later, Fuentes was spotted walking down the road wearing the same face paint. Police arrested him and charged him with 2 robberies. Apparently, the face paint wasn't a disguise. The guy liked dressing like the Joker. These criminal masterminds got caught in the dumbest way possible. Concert tickets are valuable and some people will go to extremes to get them. One man found that out the hard way when he arranged to sell his tickets to a Jay-Z concert in Houston. 2 women showed up, and Denitra Green grabbed the tickets out of his hand and sped off, and he was seriously injured when he tried to leap on the car. Police at first assumed they stole the tickets to resell them, but the women were apparently big Jay-Z fans. They were eventually apprehended when they were found watching the concert in the stolen seats and did not get to stick around for the encore. Few arrests are more embarrassing than this Texas man's case. Michael Logan Brown was enjoying his misspent youth when the 19-year-old and his friends decided to play around with a pair of handcuffs. Michael locked himself up and then realized no one had the handcuff keys. The friends tried to get the cuffs off through various means before deciding their best way was to go to the local police station and ask them to take them off with their key. This would have been smart if Michael didn't have an outstanding warrant for damaging a car windshield by jumping on it a few months earlier. If that wasn't bad enough, he probably should have cleaned his pockets out of the weed he was carrying before walking in. So Michael turned himself in without knowing it and traded his pair of handcuffs for a police-issued pair. This next Texas man lied to police on an explosive chase. Kelly Harris's luck had run out, and the truck thief knew police were on his tail. He had stolen a travel trailer, pulled a gun on the owner, and refused to stop for the police when they chased him down. He was in deep, and he was ready to go deeper. The thief started tossing portable propane tanks out of the truck while driving, maybe hoping to cause the officers to swerve away. There's just one problem: the propane is explosive, and a wrong move could have caused a massive disaster. Harris eventually left the car and ran away, and a canine officer finally tracked him down. He was charged with a host of crimes, but far less than he would have been if the tanks blew up. These next criminals were maybe a little too confident in their abilities. 2 thieves were casing cars in Haltham City, hoping for a good target, a car that was on and being warmed up on a cold morning, allowing them to carjack it and get going in seconds. They spotted a promising car, and the person inside spotted them right back. It was Detective Tony Miller sitting in an unmarked car, and he waited for those goons to make their move. As soon as they tried to enter the car, Miller pulled his gun, and the 2 crooks ran. One led Miller on a car chase before crashing while the on-foot suspect escaped. For now, he's probably not the brightest. But at least he didn't pick as bad a target as this guy. It was a quiet morning at the Wilmer Police Department when suddenly a young man walked in. Keithan Kennard Manuel came up to the dispatcher, showed her a towel wrapped around his arm, and claimed he had a gun. He demanded all the station's money and was promptly arrested for the dumbest crime possible, trying to rob a police station filled with armed officers. When he was taken into custody, his defense was that he was joking and he does things like this all the time. Not surprisingly, police were laughing and the teenager was charged with robbery. But not armed robbery, he never had a gun, just a lot of stupidity. An American rock band once said, "Do you realize that everyone you know someday will die?" It's pretty obvious, but it's also quite a sobering thought. None of us will be here in, say, 130 years. Maybe this video will still be out there, a digital antique, and people will laugh at how weird we communicated when they see what you guys have written in the comments. So today, we will embrace the fact that one day we will all die. and you, my friends, can now sit back and enjoy what we call the World Cup of ridiculous deaths. Number 8. Don't get friendly with some wild animals. Some people in this world of ours have mistakenly thought that wild animals are not actually that wild, and so they've gotten up close to what we might call natural-born killers in the animal kingdom. Arguably, the most famous case was that of a guy named Timothy Treadwell. If you haven't seen the movie about his exploits called Grizzly Man, we suggest you do at some point. Treadwell spent many of his summers in Alaska living among grizzly bears, animals that can rip a person's face off with one swipe. These animals are certainly fluffy and cute, but they are not the kinds of things we suggest you treat like a teddy bear. Treadwell was actually cautious with the bears, but he also got up close to them. Too close. After 13 summers with the bears, parts of his clothing were found inside the stomach of a 28-year-old grizzly. His girlfriend was also eaten. So yes, you have to be careful when you're around wild animals. It should be obvious, but it obviously isn't obvious to some people. There are a few recent cases of people being killed by wild animals. We don't mean to make fun of these people since their families are still grieving for them. But if we don't say anything, then we won't get the message across that you should not get up close to these certain beasts. In 2018, a man in India decided he wanted a selfie with a bear. It didn't end well, since the apex predator mauled him to death. Maybe you think that's unusual, but quite a few people have taken mortal selfies with wild animals. In fact, the BBC reported in 2018 that there had been a spate of deaths in India because people thought they could take selfies with elephants. Our advice is don't do it. It's not worth the likes on social media. In 2016 in China, a man thought it'd be a good idea to get up close to a walrus at a wildlife park and take a selfie. The walrus wasn't playing around though and pulled the man into the water and killed him. A zookeeper also died while trying to help the man. In 2015, officials at Yellowstone National Park had to issue a stark warning to all visitors. That was, please stop trying to take selfies with bison. Yep, there had been lots of cases of people doing this, and while no one died, some people suffered very serious injuries after being tossed around like a doll. It's like this, some folks hit flies away with their hands. They don't like flies. Well, some animals don't much like humans being around them. Some of them even want to eat you. Unfortunately, it gets worse than this, as you'll now see. Number 7. The gun just went off. If you search online for people who accidentally shot and killed themselves, you'll find that it happens quite often. Guns are not toys, and that's why they have safety mechanisms. There are too many cases of this happening to mention, and a lot of them happened in recent months and years in the USA. We found another case of a partygoer dying when messing with a gun. This happened in India in 2018. 3 guys were drinking when one man started showing off his pistol. The gun accidentally went off and the man died. It was reported in some Indian media that the guy was actually playing the game Russian roulette. He lost. If you don't know what that game is, it's putting one bullet in a chamber of a revolver, then spinning the chamber, and then you put the gun to your head and pull the trigger, hoping that the bullet isn't the one in the chamber. You'd think someone would have to be crazy to play that game. But if you look online, you'll find plenty of people who have died this way. Some cases are quite recent and happened in the USA. In Thailand in 2017, a man played this game with his wife. That was a very bad move because he ended up killing her. Be careful what you shoot at, too. In 1982, some guys in Arizona thought it'd be fun to shoot at a massive saguaro cacti. One of the men shot at a 26-foot-tall cactus, and a bit broke off. It landed on him and crushed him to death. The moral of the story is never ever play with guns. Don't become a statistic. Don't end up being talked about on the infographic show. The next dumb way to die is arguably even a bigger killer around the world. Number 6. Death by mushroom. Mushrooms grow everywhere, and some of the edible ones sometimes look a bit like the poisonous ones. You wouldn't believe how many people just pick up some wild mushrooms, go home, eat them, and die. There are so many cases, and it seems most mushroom deaths happen in Asia, but not all. In 2019, one French woman died and 3 others were hospitalized after they had picked up some wild mushrooms they believed to be porcini mushrooms. They weren't. They were a mushroom known as a death cap, which doesn't sound like something you should eat. The lesson here is you should never pick your own mushrooms unless you are a mushroom expert. There are lots of deadly mushrooms in this world of ours. These things have actually killed families and have injured or killed many people living in small communities. In 2014, 14 people in North Carolina became severely ill after eating mushrooms they had foraged. No one died, but they almost did. 3 of the people needed liver transplants. We found other cases in the 90s where people died in California after picking mushrooms they thought they could eat. The mushrooms again were the death caps. Death caps look like something you could eat, but they also look a bit like magic mushrooms, the hallucinogenic mushroom. Not too long ago, 4 men in the US became seriously ill after eating death caps. They thought they were going to get high and talk about the meaning of existence. Instead, they suffered severe liver damage. Okay, now to the realm of violent deaths again. This is not how you want to go. Number 5. Be careful where you swim. It's not really a dumb way to die if you just swim and something decides to eat you. But it's quite dumb if you've seen all the don't swim signs that tell you the water is full of massive crocodiles. It's happened in Australia in recent years, with one case involving a young man ignoring the signs and taking a dip. That swim ended up with the man being partly eaten by a croc. It's happened in the ocean, where massive saltwater crocodiles have taken people's lives, but it's also happened in rivers. There's a stretch of water in Australia called East Alligator River. Would you want to enter that river? Well, the authorities in recent years have been saying people know very well that they should not go in the water, but they do it as a kind of dare. Some parts of this river you can wade across, and there's a notorious crocodile hotspot called Cahill's Crossing. One guy tried to cross in 2017 and he didn't get very far. A croc took him and killed him. When he was taken, he was only standing in ankle-deep water. You should always do what those signs tell you. We're not even going to mention how many drownings there are when people swim in the ocean when signs say don't because of the conditions. Just do what you're told, that's our advice. The next one probably kills more people than anything on this list. Number 4. Treating cuts. We'll make this one short. Our advice is if you cut yourself and you have an open wound, then get it treated. Don't just ignore it because the cut might become infected. You know what? Scores of people don't treat their wounds and later they die from infection. In the 17th century, there was a famous case and involved a composer named Jean-Baptiste Lully. This guy loved dancing, and one particular dance he enjoyed involved banging a staff on the floor. One day he missed the floor and he hit his foot. This caused a pretty serious wound and it led to an infection. Lully was told at the time that this infection could kill him and his leg would have to be amputated. The man said, "No, if I lose that leg I won't be able to dance anymore." He died soon after. Now for something we might call completely disgusting. Number 3. Overeating. Yup, some people just eat too much in one sitting and die. There's an old Monty Python movie that features a man in a restaurant that eats until he explodes. And while that won't happen, people can die from consuming massive meals. It happened in the 18th century to Adolf Fredrik, the King of Sweden, aka the man who ate himself to death. In one meal, he ate lots of his beloved lobster, dishes of caviar, some sauerkraut, some smoked herring, and he washed that all down with lots of champagne. After that, he had a whopping 14 servings of semla served with a bowl of hot milk. Semla is like cream bun. The meal was in fact not far from what the guy ordered in the Monty Python movie. The king didn't explode, but he couldn't digest that much food and he died. You can die of a reputed stomach, something you might have seen in the movie called Seven. The Lancet reported a case in the 1980s of a slim London-based model dying because she ate too much. That publication said she had consumed a half pound of steak, 1 pound of liver, 2 pounds of kidney, 2 eggs, 1 cauliflower, 10 peaches, 4 pears, 4 bananas, 2 apples, 2 glasses of milk, 2 slices of bread, and 2 pounds each of grapes, plums, and carrots. It was just too much and her stomach ruptured, which means to burst. Death by eating too much has happened at eating competitions too. A man in California recently died while taking part in a taco eating contest. The guy who watched the contest and saw this man eat said it was like he'd never eaten before. He was just shoving the tacos down his mouth without chewing. The guy collapsed during the contest. It's thought he choked to death. There are scores of stories of people dying after eating too much. Look online and you'll find them. One particular guy might have seen the movie Cool Hand Luke, because in that movie Luke eats 40 boiled eggs for a bet. This happened in India and it involved 2 men. One guy bet his friend that he couldn't eat 50 raw eggs in one sitting. The man got to 41 and died. Doctors said his death was simply caused by overeating. The next on this list is the most surprising and disturbing. Too much of a good thing can kill you, and that good thing could be a certain vitamin. Yes, consuming too many vitamins can be fatal. There's a famous case of a bunch of explorers that had a terrible time on an Australasian Antarctic expedition. 2 men died after falling into a crevasse, and 2 other guys got lost. They survived by eating the dogs they had with them. The men got back to the base camp, but they both fell very ill, and one of them died. First, he became terribly sick. His hair fell out, his skin peeled off. He became delirious, and then he died. Doctors now say those symptoms were in line with vitamin A overdose. The vitamins apparently came from the dogs' livers. Those guys didn't have many options, but some people choose to get too many vitamins down them. In 1974, a health advocate in London decided to consume 70 million units of vitamin A in around 10 gallons of carrot juice over a period of 10 days. His skin turned yellow and he died. When you consume too many vitamins, you can suffer from something called hypervitaminosis. This can be deadly, and you can find instances of when it happened. You might get kidney damage and survive, but you might also give up the ghost. It happened to a 10-year-old boy in India in 2016. He was prescribed vitamin D supplements, but it was just too much and he overdosed. We found more recent cases in the US when people died after consuming too much vitamin D. In some cases, it's the doctors who are dumb, not the consumers. But we don't want to scare you from getting your essential vitamins, just don't go crazy. And for this last one, you're gonna see that many young folk die every year from doing one stupid thing. Number 1. Deadly deodorant. Okay, so we all want to smell good, but you should know that people have died from using too much deodorant. These are sad stories since the victims probably had an issue with how they smelled or what some people had said to them about their body odor, but they really shouldn't have gone crazy with the spray. In the 90s, a UK teenager died after spraying himself with deodorant all the time. It wasn't the fact that the stuff killed him by getting in his skin, but the fact that he sprayed it too often in a confined space. He died because over time he just inhaled too much spray. The autopsy showed 0.37 milligrams of butane per liter was in his blood. A level of 0.1 milligram per liter can kill you. It happened another time not that long ago in the UK. A young man was obsessed with his smell and he used deodorant all the time. In fact, an investigation found he had 45 cans of the stuff in his room. He inhaled too much and died. His mother later said he would not take showers but would stand there with deodorant and spray half of the can on him. On June 25, 1876, General George Armstrong Custer sat atop his horse on a hill overlooking the banks of the Little Bighorn River in present-day Montana. The Civil War hero, renowned for his bravery and good fortune, was plotting an ambush on the largest Indian encampment ever to assemble on the plains. Little did he know that this would be his last stand, and that this was the day when Custer's luck would finally run out after a career of daring risks and near misses. Remembered by some as a gallant war hero, and by others as a bloodthirsty villain, General Custer was a man full of contradictions and controversy. He was both a lover and a fighter, a brave but reckless warrior, and a glory-hungry but disobedient soldier. Who exactly was General Custer, and why is he such a controversial figure? George Armstrong Custer was born in Ohio in 1839, the youngest of 5 children. Young Auntie, as he was called because he couldn't pronounce his own middle name, was sent to live with his older sister in Michigan at an early age. Custer earned his teaching certificate in 1856, but he had bigger dreams for himself than teaching at a grammar school. He entered West Point Military Academy in 1857, where he was known for spending more time on pranks than on his studies. He was routinely reprimanded and constantly received demerits, often earning himself extra weekend guard duties. In an event that would foreshadow future issues with his career, he was once even court-martialed for failing to stop a fight between 2 cadets. With all these extracurricular activities, it's not all that surprising that he graduated dead last in his class in 1861. Custer graduated from West Point into a country in chaos. The Civil War had just broken out in April of 1861, and Custer saw his opportunity for glory. He joined the Union Cavalry, where he attracted the attention of his superiors for his bold leadership style, daring cavalry charges, and tactical brilliance. In June 1863, he became the youngest brigadier general in the Union Army at the age of 23. The boy general, as he was called, got his first taste of leadership in battle just a few days later during the infamous Battle of Gettysburg. On the third and final day of the bloody conflict, Confederate General J.E.B. Stuart's cavalry divisions were attempting to take the Union Army's rear by surprise when he was cut off by Custer's forces. After a ferocious battle between thousands of horsemen, Custer's men succeeded in driving off the Confederate cavalry, playing a decisive role in the Union's victory in this important battle. By the end of the Civil War, Custer's daring and bravery had earned him a promotion to Major General in charge of a whole cavalry division. Highly unusual for an officer at the time, Custer was known for leading his men from the front rather than from the rear, and he was often the first to charge into battle. General Custer also seemed to have a knack for avoiding injury, despite fighting in numerous major battles and having 11 horses shot out from underneath him. He managed to avoid serious injury throughout his career, and the term Custer's luck was coined to describe this uncanny good fortune. Custer was involved in some of the most defining moments of the Civil War. His own cavalry forces blockaded Confederate General Robert E. Lee's final retreat, and Custer himself was the one to receive General Lee's white flag, signifying his wish to surrender to Union General Ulysses S. Grant. Custer was also present for the signing of the terms of surrender between Generals Lee and Grant on April 9, 1865. Custer was so central to the Union's Civil War victory that General Philip Sheridan purchased the table that was used to sign the terms of surrender and gave it to Custer's wife in gratitude for her husband's service. Just prior to the end of the Civil War, Custer had married Elizabeth Libby Bacon in February 1864. Her father, a judge, was not supportive of the match, as he considered Custer to be beneath her. After initially rejecting him, he eventually won her over, and they began an intense courtship and passionate letter-writing habit that would persist throughout their marriage. Custer is famously quoted as saying, "I would be willing, yes, glad, to see a battle every day during my life." His life's ambition was to gain fame and glory for his battlefield exploits, and Libby was his devoted partner in this endeavor, happily playing the part of the faithful lady to his daring warrior. Custer was also notoriously flamboyant. He paid special attention to his appearance, especially his long golden hair, which he perfumed with cinnamon oil. And he always dressed in the height of the late 17th century fashion, in velvet outfits with gold lace detail and large sombreros. In 1866, Custer was promoted to lieutenant colonel, and he and Libby headed to Kansas to help deal with the Indian problem. After the Civil War had ended, more land was needed to accommodate American settlers, and as they expanded westward, they inevitably clashed with the local Indian tribes. By the 1860s, most of the local Indians had been ruthlessly forced into reservations or killed. But the Great Plains were the last Indian holdout, and the Plains Indians vowed to avoid a similar fate. Custer participated in numerous raids and battles with the Sioux and Cheyenne Indians over the control of the Western Territory. Custer faced two legendary Indian warriors, Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, for the first time in 1873 when his unit was protecting a Northern Pacific Railroad survey at Yellowstone. The government had been encouraging trains to stop so that passengers could hunt the buffalo for sport. The Indians relied on the buffalo for food, and needless slaughter escalated tensions. Although he succeeded in driving them off this time, little did Custer know that he had just faced the warriors who would bring about his own downfall years later. During this time, Custer once again demonstrated his disregard of authority when he left his regiment without permission to visit his wife Libby. He was court-martialed yet again for this exploit and stripped of his rank and pay for a year. His punishment only lasted 10 months though, before General Sheridan reinstated him to lead a campaign against the Cheyenne Indians. Custer was learning that fighting Indians was much different than fighting Confederate soldiers. The Indians had the advantage of being much more familiar with the terrain, and since they were fighting to preserve their way of life, they were much more motivated to fight to the bitter end than Custer's career soldiers. By 1876, the Plains Indian Wars had reached a stalemate. In 1868, South Dakota's Black Hills had been set aside for the Great Sioux Reservation. However, once gold was discovered in those hills just a few years later, the government quickly reneged on their deal and took over the land. Custer was tasked with relocating the Indians to their new reservation, but things didn't exactly go as planned. Rather than go quietly, most of the Indians traveled to the banks of the Little Bighorn River in present-day Montana to join Custer's old adversaries, Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, to fight for their freedom. On June 25, 1876, Custer was one of the first to arrive at the meeting point near the encampment, where he and the other generals planned to gather before fighting the Indians and forcing them to surrender to the reservations. While waiting for the other generals to arrive, it was decided that Custer and his men would move in and surround the Indians, then wait for reinforcements. Once he had located the Indians' camp, however, Custer decided to launch a surprise attack rather than wait for reinforcements. No one is quite sure why he thought this would be a good idea, but based on what we know about him, we can assume that arrogance and glory-seeking played a big role in him leading his men to certain death. The battle famously came to be called Custer's Last Stand, but in reality, he never even had a chance against such a mighty force of Indian warriors. Custer divided his 600 men into 4 groups. One group was to stay with the supplies, 2 groups were to attack the Indians from the south, and Custer's own group was to attack from the north. The South group was the first to attack, but they retreated almost immediately once it became obvious that they were not only outnumbered, but outgunned. With more than 2,000 warriors, this was the largest gathering of Indians ever seen on the Great Plains. The Indians also had superior repeating rifles and bows and arrows, while the cavalry only had single-shot rifles and .45 caliber revolvers. Custer and his own men, not knowing that their comrades had retreated, launched their attack from the north. Overwhelmed by the Indians' superior numbers and firepower, Custer's command collapsed completely, and it quickly became every man for himself. Within an hour, the Indians had massacred every single one of Custer's 210 men, except for one lucky soul who'd been sent by Custer to take a message to the South forces asking for reinforcements. Sadly, his message was ignored. Custer's subordinates, Benteen and Reno, hated him and hated each other, and had just narrowly escaped a similar fate. Whether it was cowardice, malice, or possibly even drunkenness, we don't know. All we know is that they did not come to Custer's aid when he sent the message, "Come quick." In keeping with his image as a daring leader, Custer himself was found dead alongside 40 of his men, including his own brother and nephew with 2 bullet wounds, one near his heart and one in his head. To further add to the horrors of the massacre, the Indians ritualistically stripped and mutilated the bodies of the dead, possibly because they believed the souls of disfigured bodies would be doomed to walk the earth forever. A junior military officer, upon seeing the naked bodies of his dead compatriots, famously exclaimed, "Oh, how white they look! How white!" It was once believed that Custer had been spared this indignity, but it was later revealed that his body had also been mutilated, but that the details were hushed up to protect his wife Libby. According to legend, some Cheyenne women pierced Custer's eardrums so that he could learn to listen better, and they even put a stick up his, manhood. Custer was hastily buried where he fell with the rest of his men, but he was later disinterred and reburied with a great ceremony at West Point. A memorial to him was erected in 1881 at the site of the battle. The Battle of the Little Bighorn was the U.S.'s biggest defeat in the Plains Indian Wars. The Indians' victory was short-lived, however. The American public demanded retribution for the death of Custer, a decorated Civil War general and American folk hero. So the Army intensified their efforts to hunt down Indians and either relocate them or wipe them out completely. Facing unprecedented violence against his people, Crazy Horse finally surrendered in 1877, bringing the Plains Indian Wars to a close. We have his devoted wife Libby to thank for the enduring power of Custer's controversial legacy. She lived another 57 years after his death and spent the rest of her life writing books and giving lectures about his heroism and gallantry. She was helped in her efforts by William Buffalo Bill Cody, a one-time scout for Custer who went on to create his famous Traveling Wild West show, a highlight of which was a reenactment of Custer's last stand, featuring real Native American warriors who had actually fought at the Little Bighorn. Custer was even immortalized on the silver screen when future President Ronald Reagan played him in the film Santa Fe Trail. Custer himself had written his autobiography shortly before his death, and My Life on the Plains went on to become a bestseller. After Libby's death in 1933, however, the American public began to acknowledge that perhaps Custer wasn't the flawless hero he'd been made out to be. At the height of his fame during the Plains Indian Wars, the New York Tribune wrote, "Future writers of fiction will find in General Custer most of the qualities which will go to make up a first-class hero. While his heroism might be up for debate in modern times, his legend certainly lives on today, and we suspect that the flamboyant glory-monger wouldn't have wanted it any other way."
It's 8 years in the future, and Gen Alpha's oldest are clocking in for their jobs. They sit down behind their computer and look at you totally confused when you ask them to find a file on the C drive. "The what?" they say. You walk over, you tell them to type the file name into Finder, and watch in horror as they hunt and peck on the keyboard at 8 words a minute, one agonizing key at a time. The migraine brewing in your skull whispers, "Welcome to hell." It's going to be a very long day. That's not the only dumb thing you'll come across when dealing with Generation Alpha, because as it turns out, they believe in even dumber things than this, which we'll be exploring today on the Infographic Show. Fact number 9. Generation Alpha doesn't believe in learning about computers. Somehow, the most tech-obsessed generation of all time might be one of the least computer-savvy as well. The first Gen Alpha kids were born in 2010, the same year the iPad was released. 2/3 of them started using iPads by the time they were 5 years old, and not long out of diapers. And apparently, they never graduated to computers. Teachers have been shocked at the lack of typing and basic computer skills that they see from their students. But that's probably because schools aren't really teaching any of that. In 2019, only 2.5% of high school graduates had completed a keyboarding course, an essential skill for traditional computing. Compare that to 2000, when 44% of graduates had taken the course. But that doesn't mean Gen Alpha is entirely out of touch. Learning management system Canvas reported that 39% of assignments were submitted via mobile devices. Sure, they can type on their phones, but their beliefs about that ability might surprise you. Of all the dumb things Gen Alpha believes, this might be one of the smallest but most ridiculous. Fact number 8. Texting with proper punctuation means you're angry. If you like sending texts with proper grammar, capitalization, or periods and exclamation marks, congrats, you've just pissed off a Gen Alpha child. One Gen Alpha student said, "Typing with capital letters and grammar is kinda like weird. Punctuation in full sentences is a school thing." Her friend reinforced this point by saying, "I only text normal if I'm upset or mad." This leads to a lot of miscommunication between older and younger family members. So no punctuation, no grammar. What's left? Emojis? Nope, wrong again. With Gen Alpha, you either get an eye roll or accidentally spark an international incident. You see, Gen Alpha also believes that. Fact number 7. Most emojis are actively sarcastic and offensive. Have you ever sent a thumbs up emoji to agree with someone via text? How about clapping hands or the OK sign? Well, depending on which you send, you're either sarcastic, cringe, or a racist. So use emojis with care. Gen Alpha sends thumbs up and clapping hands emojis sarcastically. You know that meme that you sent to your niece that you thought was so hilarious, and she responded with clapping hands? Yeah, so sorry to be the one to tell you this, she's making fun of you. As far as the OK sign, more young people are aware that it's linked to white supremacy hand symbols, so they've stopped sending it in their texts. What if you just want to let your Gen Alpha younger brother know that you love him? Better not send a red heart because it's low effort and out of fashion. See, the red heart is really overused, and since it's the first option available when you search for heart emojis, it doesn't show much effort. Sending it says, "I care about you," but not enough to scroll. It's the emoji equivalent of buying flowers from a gas station. Put in the work and pick a different color heart instead. And if you tell him to be back by curfew and he sends you a thumbs up, yeah, he's not getting in till 2 a.m. Why does Gen Alpha seem so indifferent to writing correctly? Perhaps it's because reading itself is not a top priority for them. This video is sponsored by Aura. If you've ever Googled yourself or a loved one and have been shocked by how much personal information is publicly available, you're not alone. Just the other day I searched my name and there it was. Old addresses, phone numbers, and even email addresses I haven't used in years. It made me realize just how easy scammers and spammers can get access to that information. And that's where Aura comes in. Aura is designed to protect your personal information and keep it out of the hands of data brokers who sell it to scammers. It's not just about reducing annoying spam calls and texts, it's about keeping your identity secure. Aura helps by automatically opting you out of data broker sites and alerting you if your info is exposed. They even monitor your sensitive data across billions of records, including the dark web. And if something happens, you're covered with up to $1 million in identity theft insurance for each adult on your plan. There's also a ton of additional features, like a VPN with military-grade encryption, antivirus protection, a secure password manager, and 24/7 US-based support in case you ever need help. And the best part is I get all of this protection in one app at an affordable price. I'm not leaving myself or my family vulnerable to data breaches or identity theft. And if you don't want to either, go to aura.com/infographics or scan the QR code on the screen to try Aura for 2 weeks free and see if your data is already exposed. Now back to the video. Number 6. Gen Alpha isn't learning how to read. A recent study by the National Association of Educational Progress, or NAEP, found that 67% of 4th graders aren't proficient in reading. This is a 3% increase since 2019, and it seems things are only getting worse. If you can't read, you are doomed to a life of guessing. Sorry, history and science aren't things you can just fully grasp through podcasts, no matter how hard you try. Sometimes you just have to face the horror of a textbook, a study, or an actual article to get the facts. However, just because Gen Alpha doesn't really believe in learning to read, we can't fully blame them for this one. Exhausted and overworked teachers just can't keep up with the demands of their classrooms, and many schools stopped teaching phonics. For any Gen Alpha people watching this video, phonics is just matching letters and letter combinations to sounds. The COVID lockdown also played a big part in interrupting students' education. News site Axios found that reading and math scores for 13-year-olds plummeted between the 2019 to 2020 school year and 2022 to 2023. A study of 460 schools found that reading scores dropped 4 points on average. Over the years, new local, state, and national laws have changed to make students graduate to their next grade no matter what, even if they're not ready to or, don't even know how to read. Maybe that's why Gen Alpha prefers to get information about almost everything from videos instead. No reading required. But maybe Gen Alpha believes a little too much of what it sees online. Fact number 5. Gen Alpha believes influencers way too much. Marketing agencies found that 49% of Gen Alphas trust influencers as much as family with purchasing decisions. Okay, so we're not saying your mom has the best fashion sense and style recommendations, but let's face it, trusting a random influencer you've never met isn't exactly an upgrade. They're being paid to sell you something, not to make sure you look good. It's probably just a fancy way to drain your wallet. But Gen Alpha is easily swayed by ads. Marketing communications agency Wunderman Thompson found that the majority of alphas, 57%, say seeing adverts on social media makes them want to buy those products. and influencers are targeting Gen Alpha more and more because even though they're underage and unemployed, they wield an insane amount of power over their parents' wallets. Who needs a job when you can just weaponize tantrums and TikTok trends to control the family budget? Weirdly enough, maybe it's because they also like a lot of the same brands their parents do. Forget about kids' toys and clothing. Gen Alpha likes to dress like they're already worrying about mortgage rates. Many Gen Zers online have noticed this in their younger siblings. One of them said, "Back in my day, the cool girls wore sparkly sequined shirts. Now everyone in that age group wants to wear the same things as teenagers and young adults." Gen Alpha skips the usual kids and teens clothing stores and likes to shop exactly where their parents shop. Lululemon, Nike, Sephora, and Target are some of their favorite brands. Apparently, Gen Alpha thinks dressing and acting like someone worrying about their retirement fund is cool. It's also no coincidence Sephora is on that list. It brings us to their next weird belief. Fact number 4. Gen Alpha believes they need hundreds of dollars of skincare as preteens. Maybe instead of the iPad generation, Gen Alpha should be called the Botox generation. Not so much because they're getting it, most are still too young, but because they are very influenced by older people's obsession with anti-aging. Skincare brands like Drunk Elephant, once the go-to for millennial women panicking over their first wrinkles, are now a hit with Gen Alpha kids who haven't even had their first pimple. Parents have a term for it, the Sephora kid pandemic, while they're acting like they're not the ones actually buying those products for their middle school kids. TikTok and YouTube are full of teenagers doing hours-long nighttime skincare routines. They're showing off hundreds and hundreds of dollars of serums and anti-aging products and generally acting way too old for their age. Mark Elric, the creator of skincare brand Bioma, said, "The rise of the shelfie, a photo of what's in your bathroom shelf, has been a game changer for our brand. This demographic is collecting skincare, and it helps if your brand is aesthetically pleasing and fun. For older generations who remember collecting baseball cards or stamps, collecting tubes of retinol might sound like a weird hobby. If you were a teenager in the early 2000s, we guess your bathroom shelves in middle school only had toothpaste, face wash, and maybe Axe body spray if you were a teenage boy. We hoped that a generation as progressive as Gen Alpha wouldn't have girls obsessing over looking perfect all the time. But it turns out that is not the only weird retro gender idea Gen Alpha has. Because here's a crazy fact about them. Fact number 3. Gen Alpha believes that there are alpha, beta, and sigma males. Most dictionaries of Gen Alpha slang will include the phrase sigma, meaning sigma male. For those of you who haven't kept up to date with what Andrew Tate and his followers are talking about, sigma males are apparently a step above alpha males. While alpha males are macho leaders, sigma males are so macho that they don't even care if they're leading someone or not. The totally accurate scientific definition of a sigma male is a lone wolf kind of guy, the kind of person who doesn't care what other people think, and that getting help from others is a weakness. Wondering how this lone wolf type of male character came about? The alpha and beta categories were first based on a study of wolves that determined that a pack would follow one alpha male most of the time, something that has been proven completely untrue since then. In later studies, scientists watched wolves in the wild and saw that the animals are much more collaborative than they originally thought, without a single alpha anyone emerging to lead. The first study's author came out and said his research was flawed and he no longer stands by it. But that hasn't stopped thousands of TikTok and YouTube influencers from pushing the narrative. Now large parts of Gen Alpha are being convinced they need to pick a side, alpha, beta, or sigma, before they even hit middle school. But along with all these very old school beliefs, Gen Alpha has a very new age belief as well that is also really dumb. Fact number 2. They think there is no such thing as failure. Now, the rest of us know failure exists. That's because we're reminded of it every time our parents call us and ask us when we're planning on moving out of our studio apartment. But Gen Alpha has a very different take. One 6th grade math teacher was worried about her kids. They just don't care about academics. They don't care if they're failing. They want to be constantly entertained, and I have some students that struggle to work independently. Obviously, being able to rebound from failure is a good skill to learn. But that doesn't seem to be Gen Alpha's approach. An 11th grade teacher with 25 years of experience shared the differences they see in Gen Alpha compared to their past students. Students in 2024 are much more apathetic than previous generations. In the past, if a student didn't complete an assignment on time, they would be upset and ask for an extension. Now, they simply shrug and accept the 0. Not caring about grades or doing well in school seems to be a trend. Many parents, older siblings, and teachers complain that Gen Alpha doesn't seem to care as much as other generations about good grades. One frustrated observer said, "You're not going to go anywhere if you don't graduate high school. You can't get a job or an internship if you don't at least have a high school diploma." Or maybe these kids really want to do nothing in life. Maybe because they see so many online influencers in their lives, they think it's a good career plan. To be clear, it's not. Or maybe it's the fact that technology has made learning seem pointless in general. Which brings us to the last and perhaps most serious dumb thing Gen Alpha believes. Fact number 1. Why learn when I can just Google? Teachers are hearing questions like this in the classroom all the time. Kids have trained themselves to think they can just cut and paste answers they find, and they think they've learned something. Most of the time, they just click on the link at the top of their search. That may be why teachers are seeing students with less general knowledge. What's the point of learning something when you can just ask ChatGPT at any time? However, if you don't already have general knowledge, you can't really judge if what you're finding makes sense. You also need to be able to get around the world without using an AI app that's wrong 5 to 20% of the time, depending on the subjects. For some topics like programming, researchers found ChatGPT was wrong closer to 52% of the time. There are also skills you can't learn from Google or AI, like fine motor skills necessary for a lot of what humans do in everyday life. First grade teacher Jason Forbes explains the big difference he's seen in students, with many not even being able to hold a pen or pencil correctly. We see a lot of letters that are backwards or they don't hold the pencil correctly. These are things that go back to early schooling and what they do at home. They need to develop those fine motor skills. Sure, we've had a bit of fun with Gen Alpha in this article, but let's be real, many of the quirks and misconceptions they hold aren't entirely their fault. Social media algorithms scream at them with constant noise, leaving little room for critical thinking. Parents, often overwhelmed or distracted, struggle to guide them through the early stages of life, and shifting educational priorities mean that foundational skills like reading sometimes fall by the wayside. Are you surprised at some of the things Generation Alpha believes? Let us know in the comments below. It's another family reunion, and you've been tasked with keeping your eye on your 10-year-old cousin. No big deal, except that talking to this kid feels like trying to converse in a foreign language. That is, when he's even looking up from his phone. Is this a Gen Alpha thing, or are you just getting old? These are the dumbest trends that Generation Alpha might wind up regretting one day on this episode of The Infographic Show. Number 10. So much screen time. If there is one complaint about Gen Alpha that even Gen Z folks are pointing out, it's that these kids are constantly on their phones. Okay, they're not the first digital native generation, but they are the first smartphone natives, growing up with a smartphone or a tablet computer in their hands while they were getting their diapers changed. Can you blame mom? It's hard to get things done with a crying baby, and if another round of Baby Shark quiets those tears, it's the easiest thing to do. But that was just the start, and today's Gen Alpha kids interact with the world in a very different way. For millennials, they might still remember wall phones and dial-up internet. Gen Z still probably started with a standard home computer to work on. But Gen Alpha essentially had a powerful computer just for them the second they had a phone, which might be elementary school in many cases. And when social media, games, and videos are only a poke away at any moment, it can be hard to disconnect from that. And as more schools discuss phone bans or bringing back old ones, it might not be easy to break the habit. But the schools might have a good reason to be worried. Number 9. Their attention span is… Wait, what? It's easy to get bored when there are alternatives. We've all been watching that one TV show that went on forever. But with Gen Alpha, attention spans have reportedly gone down the tubes, decreasing massively and leaving content providers thinking not in minutes but in seconds. The most popular viral videos among Gen Alpha kids are often short, fast-paced, and gimmicky musical segments. Think Baby Shark but with a warped sense of humor. And that has led YouTube providers, streamers, and others to try to tailor their content to the new kids. But that might be a big problem for schools. According to the American Psychological Association, the average attention span has slowly decreased from 2.5 minutes to only 47 seconds from 2004 to the present day. That has not made it easy to teach complex concepts like long division. It's called long for a reason, people. Teachers have reported major problems keeping the current generation of elementary and middle school kids focused on their assignment. The shift back to in-person education after a year of remote learning during COVID in some cases has only made this trickier. which leads some people to ask, don't these kids know how to behave? Number 8. Yakety yak, don't talk back. It's not just that kids are having trouble learning, it's that they're reportedly very resistant to teacher instructions. There have been school rebellions over cell phone bans, and students frequently walk out of class in organized protests. And millennial parents of Gen Alpha kids report that this isn't limited to schools. Their kids talk back to them, challenge their opinions, and even publicly post about how backwards their boomer parents are, to which their parents will say, "Hey, I'm a millennial." But the problem is they're not fully raising them anymore. This is the first generation raised on social media. In the past, when a kid had a disagreement with mom and dad, they would either sulk in their room or maybe hope someone on the Neopets message board agreed with them. Now they can go on Reddit and get thousands of people validating them in only a few minutes. Some parents of Gen Alpha are defending their kids, saying that it's good they don't accept anything on face value. But others are wondering, if this is how they talk to their parents and teachers, how are they going to talk to their first boss or a police officer who pulls them over? And if they are not listening, they might not learn some essential things. Number 7. Does TikTok have a how-to? It's something that happens in every generation. The boomers used to be amazed that millennials didn't know how to use whiteout or dial a rotary phone. As technology changes, a lot of things are being forgotten. That's just the way of the world. But Gen Alpha might be different. They seem to have no interest in a lot of things that are still alive and well, but might not be for long. A good example is the post office, which seems to many of them to be a relic of a simpler time when you couldn't just text your thoughts to the person next to you. But then those things might not be there when they're needed. The post office has been running on a shoestring for a long time, with many worries about service cutbacks. If Gen Alpha has no interest in keeping it afloat, then the age of handwritten cards and postcards from the road might be gone for good. The same goes for just about anything else that Gen Alpha loses interest in, like phone calls. One of the strangest parts of this phenomenon is how the smartphone generation almost never makes phone calls. This has led to smartphones for this generation essentially being portable computers and little more. But a much bigger problem might come from this, and it is aimed directly at the economy. Number 6. Less stuff, please. If there is one thing that you can count on with kids, it's that they'll always want more. More of what? Everything! The long holiday and birthday lists are the surest of sure things, from the days of the Big Wish book from Sears to the current Amazon wish lists. But with Gen Alpha, things might be changing. Inspired by influencers who talk about decluttering and anti-consumerism, some are eschewing material possessions, preferring online tokens and status symbols to things that can be bought online. And this could change the landscape for good. The reasons for this are pretty varied, from worries about the environment to ethical concerns with mass production, to simply not thinking top brands are cool. Brick-and-mortar retail is already struggling due to online shopping. Add in a generation that's less interested in both, and that could be a death blow to a large list of chains and small businesses. Gen X and millennials made the malls a sensation, but they might end up watching as their kids deliver the death blow to this massive piece of the American landscape. Seen any of these trends? Leave a comment. Now let's look at something that's becoming more and more common. Number 5. Fake news! Fake news! There are a lot of news sources today that teenagers don't use much anymore. Cable news definitely isn't popular, to say nothing of a good old newspaper. But the bigger problem is that the news sources they're using really aren't news sources at all. One of the most common is TikTok influencers, who often post short-form reels with a highly biased framing, if they're not just making it up. That's where a popular meme about Vladimir Putin opening an ancient vault proving all biblical figures were black came from. The site has also been used to spread misinformation during more serious crises, like the recent hurricanes. But at least that's based on something, unlike another source. Gen Alpha has been growing up with AI as an option, and many are falling back on ChatGPT to answer their questions. The problem is, ChatGPT is little more than a content aggregator, unable to tell fact from fiction. This means that they can easily get inaccurate or even dangerous information. Many of them are printing out these responses and then handing them in as school assignments. Teachers are tired of having to be plagiarism checkers, but they're even more worried about these kids growing up without learning how to detect BS. And they're taking that lack of fact-checking online. Number 4. You posted what? If there is one rule that parents used to instill in their kids, it's to be careful what you post online. And the stakes are higher than ever. When millennials were getting their bearings on the internet, they were mostly posting to private message boards and communities. Now most posts are made on public social media sites with millions or even billions of posters. That means that unhinged people from all around the world can see what a kid posts. And of course, they'll react with all the calm and decorum an older person should have. But the consequences of a loose social media style can be far worse than just a troll visit. Gen Alpha seems to have a serious problem with online filters, to the point that many have gotten into major social media trouble. Some make posts bashing their school or fellow students and find themselves suspended. Others make the very poor decision of discussing committing a crime and then wind up with a visit from the police or the FBI. And even if they don't make a life-risking mistake, odds are high that some of their politically radicalized posts will wind up being read back to them in a job interview in 10 years. And that's if they don't wind up in far more risk now. Number 3. Stranger danger. One of the most memorable features of an 80s or 90s childhood was being warned about the dangers that lurk around every corner. Never take candy from a stranger. Never get into a stranger's car. Always seek out a trusted authority figure if you get lost. Watch out for quicksand. But that was before some kids were interacting with thousands of adults on Twitter before they were even in middle school. That makes it incredibly easy to give away personal information on a daily basis, giving bad people an opportunity to take advantage of kids. And this isn't just something that happens by accident. Some of Gen Alpha enforces it. It's become increasingly popular for kids to feel like they should be posting personal things about them up front to find like-minded people. This can include their age, their race, their pronouns, and their political views and interests, all posted prominently on their user profile. This has led to popular sites like Roblox becoming unsafe for kids, as sinister figures are looking to scam kids or lure them into unsafe situations. It's easy to set up accounts and browse for marks. In this case, kids sharing isn't caring. So talk to Gen Alpha kids, if you can understand them. Number 2. Say what? Every generation has its own slang, and every generation hates the next generation's slang. This isn't a new development, and we all remember bickering with our parents over terms, whether that was cool or fleek, but there's something different about this generation, in that parents don't just dislike the slang, they legitimately don't understand it. Sigma, one of the last letters of the Greek alphabet, is used to mean an independent person who is self-confident and self-sufficient, kinda like an alpha male but more humble. And that's just the start of the new lingo. Some terms are just casual shortenings of words like Riz referring to charisma, but others are just nonsensical. How did "that's so Ohio" come to mean something weird and dumb? Did anyone ask Ohio about this? A lot of the lingo has been called mean-spirited, suited for bullying, that people might not even fully understand. It's been reminiscent of classical coded language like Pig Latin, but used much more widely, which raises one question. If someone doesn't understand what the kids are saying, will they even bother to try, or just stop interacting with them? But there is one term that's even more puzzling, and it relates to the most cringe-worthy Gen Alpha trend. Number 1. What's the skibbity? The most puzzling Gen Alpha slang, skibbity, means good, or bad, or mediocre, or whatever the person is using it to mean, really. And it tops the list of slang banned by frustrated teachers. But this bizarre word goes far beyond lingo, into the sensation that's sweeping the generation. Skibbity Toilet is a bizarre series of viral videos where ugly heads stick themselves out of toilets, singing in nonsensical words and riding around terrorizing people. It went viral to the point of tens of millions of hits. But how big can it possibly be? What started as a 15-second clip of singing toilets has evolved into a bizarre ongoing saga of a futuristic war between toilet heads and other humanoids. Most are only a few minutes at most, and are streamed endlessly by kids who seem to understand them in a way that is baffling to most older people. A movie is in development, which means adults might just have to understand it a little better soon. But if you ask a kid why they like it so much, they're likely to just say, "You're so skibbity." Generational warfare is far from new. So check out You versus Boomer for how ridiculous it can get, or check out this video instead. There's no business like show business, and there's no people like show people. But even if that's true, celebrities aren't immune from death. This is Dumb Ways to Die Celebrity Edition. Not everyone on this list is at fault for their own deaths, but they still managed to die in a pretty ridiculous way. Before we start, let's get one popular misconception out of the way. since it's usually one of the first deaths people think of when thinking of bizarre celebrity deaths. Some of you might think we left him off the list by accident, so let's clear up this misunderstanding first. Tennessee Williams was a prolific playwright and screenwriter, best known for A Streetcar Named Desire, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, Sweet Bird of Youth, and The Night of the Iguana. Sadly, despite his genius, he was a troubled and self-destructive person. He was a known alcohol and drug abuser. At the age of 71, Tennessee Williams was found dead in New York City in his suite at the Hotel Elysee on February 25, 1983. It was first reported that Williams had choked to death on a plastic bottle cap that he'd used to take barbiturates, a type of drug that's used to treat seizures and other similar conditions. Sounds like a dumb way to die, right? Choking on the bottle cap instead of the drugs? What many people don't know is the report was corrected months later on August 14, 1983. He hadn't actually died on the small choking hazard, but an overdose of Seconal or secobarbital, a type of barbiturate. Now, if you still categorize this as a dumb way to die, we'll leave that up to you. We felt we'd be remiss not to correct this often repeated piece of misinformation. Aeschylus is the oldest celebrity death on our list. He was an ancient Greek tragedian, and he was considered the father of tragedy. If you're familiar with Greek plays, you might also know his works, the Oresteia, the Persians, or Seven Against Thebes. It's possible he also authored Prometheus Bound, but this claim is disputed by historians. Aeschylus was killed by a tortoise. He was 67 when an eagle dropped a tortoise on his head. It's believed that the eagle thought his bald head was a rock, and that the bird had intended to use the rock to crack open the turtle's shell. Roman author Pliny stated that Aeschylus spent a lot of time outdoors because of a prophecy that he'd be killed by a falling object. There's no way to verify if this is actually true, as is the case with many deaths from the ancient world, but we personally want to believe the story, as death by tortoise is a rather ironic way to go for the father of tragedy. You may not remember Martha Mansfield, but she was an American actress during America's silent film and vaudeville days. In other words, she was one of the original celebrities. Mansfield died in 1923 when she was only 24 years old, in a freak accident on set. She was playing the lead role in a silent film known as The Warrens of Virginia, a film about a Southern woman falling in love with a Union soldier in the Civil War. It was the movie that was going to skyrocket her to stardom. They were filming in San Antonio when Mansfield was sitting in her car just after finishing her scenes. She was still in a costume that had a billowing hoop skirt and flimsy ruffles. Someone on the set tossed a match that would ignite her costume. The car's chauffeur burned his hands trying to remove the inflamed clothing, while Wilfred Lytell, the film's leading man, threw his overcoat on her to put her out. She was rushed to the hospital where she died on November 30th, 1923. The doctors noted she had burns on all extremities, general toxemia, and suppression of urine. She would be interred at Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx. No one knows who threw the match. Some say they saw someone throw a match into the car, which would mean someone on set was stupid enough to just toss a match anywhere. Others believe Mansfield wanted to smoke a cigarette to calm her nerves, and she ignited the dress by dropping the match on herself, which would still be tragic but a lesson to maybe not mess with fire around a large frilly dress. Mansfield's mother, Harriet Ehrlich, would immediately reject that theory though, saying her daughter was uncomfortable with smoking. Either way, this tragedy resulted from someone's carelessness and stupidity. If you're wondering if the film was released, it was. They simply edited down Mansfield's role, and Rosemary Hill was changed into the leading lady. Isadora Duncan was originally from San Francisco but moved to Europe to become a dancer in her early 20s. Isadora Duncan always loved to dance. She worked as a dance teacher at her mother's music school, even though she wasn't actually a classically trained ballerina. Her dances were improvisational, and she preferred to dance barefoot. She was particularly popular with female audiences, and she had good reason to want to start a dancing career in Europe. Her American citizenship was revoked in the early 1920s due to her being a communist. Duncan would meet her end on September 14, 1927. She was the passenger in a brand new convertible sports car, wearing an enormous red scarf that she had adopted since embracing communism. What should have been a fun day turned dark. She leaned her head back to enjoy the sea breeze, and her scarf somehow blew into the rear wheel on the passenger side of the car. The scarf wound around the axle, it tightened around Duncan's neck, and dragged her out of the car. She fell onto the cobblestone street, dying instantly. If you're familiar with the song Country Roads, you may already know John Denver, who was one of the original composers and the original singer. Denver was a popular singer and a songwriter in the 1970s, focusing on acoustic folk music. Denver died in a plane crash on October 1997. By itself, that's not so dumb, it's simply tragic. the dumb part of this death comes from how he died in that plane crash. John Denver was the pilot and the only passenger on the plane, and it's not totally clear what caused the crash. The details we do know make it immediately clear the whole thing was a bad idea from the start. Denver was flying in an experimental home-built aircraft. He was also flying without a pilot's license. Due to his arrest record for drunk driving, he was not legally permitted to fly any plane. Although the autopsy found no signs of alcohol or drugs in his system, it seems like a bad idea to fly a plane without a license. So while his death was tragic, we do have to add him to the list of dumb ways to die Celebrity Edition. And perhaps the cherry on top was one of Denver's most popular songs, Leavin' on a Jet Plane. Hungarian-born Harry Houdini was a renowned escape artist. He would jump off bridges in handcuffs and leg irons, submerge himself in a Chinese water torture cell upside down by his ankles, and escape sealed milk cans filled with water. Although impressive, Houdini was an accident waiting to happen. So, what did him in? Did he drown? Suffocate? Did he plunge to his death? On October 24th, Houdini was performing for a packed house only to be whisked away to be treated for appendicitis, dying a week later on Halloween. People were confused. It sounds like such an ordinary death for such an extraordinary man. It was a series of extremely peculiar events that would lead to Houdini's death, beginning with a botched performance of the Chinese water torture cell. He was struck on the leg by faulty equipment, fracturing his ankle. He was told to rest by his doctor. Unsurprisingly, Houdini ignored that advice. He would give a lecture at McGill University and afterwards spoke with some of the students in the dressing room at the Princess Theater. One of the students, J. Gordon Whitehead, asked Houdini if he could resist hard punches to his abdomen. Houdini confirmed the rumors, and Whitehead immediately punched Houdini in the stomach 4 to 5 times. It was said his punches had a great deal of force behind them, and they were deliberate and well-directed. Houdini was still in a reclining position when Whitehead struck, and he had no time to prepare for the punches. However, Houdini shrugged the incident off. Later that same evening, he would complain of discomfort and stomach cramps, and his condition worsened the next day. While on an overnight train to Detroit to continue performing, Houdini struggled with severe abdominal pain, cold sweats, fatigue, and his temperature rose to 104 degrees. Instead of going to the doctor, Houdini was determined to continue performing, which was likely his undoing. Although he managed to make it through his routine, he would collapse after the final curtain. He was taken to a hospital for surgery where the doctors removed his appendix, but it was too late. It had ruptured days before, and it had already poisoned him. He would die on October 31st with his wife, Bess, and his brothers by his side. Our advice is if your doctor puts you on bed rest, listen to him and rest. Oh, and don't just punch people in the stomach, that's pretty stupid and messed up. Rod Hull was a British comedian and an entertainer who was often seen with his sidekick, Emu, a silent and aggressive emu puppet. He died while trying to watch a football match on TV between Manchester United and Inter Milan. A lot of you might be too young to remember that once upon a time, televisions had TV aerials or television antenna. There were antennas that were designed for TVs to receive over-the-air broadcast television signals from a television station. Sometimes if your TV was messing up, you had to adjust the antenna to get it working again. When the picture on Hull's TV started to deteriorate, he climbed up onto the roof of his home in Winchelsea, East Sussex, to adjust the antenna so he could continue watching the game. Hull would fall to his death trying to fix his television. No one witnessed his death, so it's not entirely clear what happened. He might have simply lost his footing, but some people have brought up the possibility that he may have had a heart attack. However, no one can say if he had a heart attack before or after the fall. While this is a dumb way to die, it's also not a likely cause of death in this day and age. What we will say is be careful climbing up on rooftops, otherwise you might be doomed to share Hull's fate. Hollywood has a history of stupid. On-set accidents have gotten people killed. As of 2021, at least 43 people have died on film sets in the United States since 1990. Brandon Lee was an actor, martial artist, and the son of late martial arts star Bruce Lee. In 1993, he met a tragic but avoidable end while filming a death scene for The Crow. He accidentally died when he was shot with a prop gun. The autopsy revealed the gun had actually fired a .44 caliber slug that ended up lodged near the actor's spine. John Eric Hexum was an actor and model best known for Voyagers and Cover Up. While on the set of Cover Up, Hexum pretended to shoot himself in the head with a prop gun for a fake game of Russian roulette. Unfortunately, the .44 Magnum fired off a real bullet into his head. While the actors are not at fault, the disregard that those in charge had for the actor's safety lands this on our list of dumb ways to die. Why were prop guns loaded in the first place? 62-year-old Jimmy Heselton was a British businessman who bought the Segway company from Dean Kamen, the inventor of the Segway and iBot, in 2009. Not long after, he died by accidentally riding one of the scooters off a cliff near his Yorkshire home. Witnesses watched as Heselton drove his scooter off a cliff, after which he fell over 30 feet into a river below. When authorities arrived, they pronounced Heselton dead at the scene, finding his destroyed scooter close by in the water. Dying as a result of an electric scooter joyride made by your own company is nonetheless certainly a death that deserves a spot on the list. Claude François was a French pop singer, composer, songwriter, record producer, drummer, and dancer in the 1960s and 70s. He was known as Clo-Clo to his fans, and he was one of the most popular recording artists in France. One afternoon, François planned to head out to a recording studio but wanted to have a shower first. When he finished, he noticed the light bulb above the shower had burned out. François' feet were still in the water when he reached up to change the bulb. As he touched the metal part of the light fitting, he was electrocuted. All efforts to revive him were in vain, and he died at 3:30 p.m. If you ever see a burned-out light in your bathroom, make sure you dry yourself thoroughly before even attempting to change the light. John James McMurray was a Canadian rapper, stuntman, and free skier who died on October 20, 2018. He was filming a music video where he was walking on the wing of a plane while rapping. The further McMurray went out on the wing, the more weight he put on the edges, causing the plane to go into a downward spiral. The pilot was unable to recover from the maneuver, and while McMurray did have a parachute, he clung to the wing of the plane for far too long. By the time he let go, it was far too late. He fell to the ground and died upon impact. No one else was physically injured during the stunt. You might have heard of Alan and Alex Stokes, two TikTokers who staged 2 fake bank robberies for a video. One incident even led to an unsuspecting Uber driver being held at gunpoint by police. Social media might have had people doing crazy things, but even before social media hit the scene, people were doing some pretty dumb stuff for attention. The Stokes reminded us of Luciano Recchicconi, also known as Leangelo Biondo, meaning the blonde angel. He was an Italian footballer who was known to have a good sense of humor throughout his career. That sense of humor would lead to his demise. On January 18, 1977, Recchicconi, his teammate Pietro Ghedin, and another friend headed to a jewelry shop in Rome owned by Bruno Tabocchini. Recchicconi and Ghedin decided to play what they thought would be a harmless prank on Tabocchini. When their friend entered the jeweler's ahead of them, Recchicconi and Ghedin covered their faces with their jackets and shouted, "Hands in the air, this is a stick-up." What Recchicconi and Ghedin didn't know is that just a few weeks earlier, the jewelry shop had been robbed. So Tabocchini was prepared. When he pulled out a shotgun, Ghedin noticed it and immediately put his hands in the air. Recchicconi, on the other hand, didn't see it and continued with the prank. Tabocchini opened fire and Recchicconi was shot in the chest at close range. Despite everyone's best efforts, Recchicconi would die 30 minutes after being shot. His last words were, "It's a joke! It's just a joke!" Recchicconi's stupid prank meant he left behind his wife and 2 children. Tabocchini was arrested, but never charged for the murder. Perhaps Recchicconi could act as a mortality tale for all social media influencers. The Stokes twins are fortunate that the only consequences they faced were 160 hours of community service and a year probation. Kinks aren't unusual. If you aren't hurting anyone, there's really no reason to shame anyone for having them, but you have to be careful. We warned you, as if you're not careful, certain kinks can get deadly, such as in the case of beloved actor David Carradine, who was found dead in the closet of a Bangkok hotel room on June 3, 2009. Carradine was best known for playing the titular Bill from the Kill Bill film series. Thai police believe Carradine accidentally died while engaging in autoerotic asphyxia, which is a subcategory of sexual masochism. It involved intentionally restricting oxygen to the brain for sexual arousal. Since it's typically practiced alone, it is particularly dangerous. We're not here to yuck anyone's yum, but please be careful or you might be next on the list of dumb ways to die. To this day, Australian zookeeper and conservationist Steve Irwin is still a beloved figure, but we think that even he would have a good sense of humor about his death. He knew the risks he was taking with wild animals. It's not a career for the faint of heart. Irwin's death was a complete freak accident that no one could have predicted. While filming in the Great Barrier Reef during a lull in filming, Irwin decided to snorkel in the shallow waters. He wanted to help provide footage for his daughter's television show, Bindi the Jungle Girl. It was during this time that he was stung by a stingray. Its barb pierced through his chest, hitting his thoracic wall and heart. At first, he believed it had only punctured his lung, but the barb to the heart was causing internal bleeding and eventually led to his untimely demise. Although CPR was administered and Irwin was rushed to the nearby low island, he was pronounced dead by medical staff. His death is the only known stingray fatality caught on film, and he is one of the few people to die by stingray. The conclusion of the story is, watch out around wildlife. It's as unforgiving as it is unpredictable. Even animals believed to be relatively safe can be deadly. But with what we know about Steve Irwin, we're sure he wouldn't want us to hold it against Mother Nature. Canadian country folk singer and environmentalist Taylor Mitchell would also learn this lesson the hard way. Mitchell was alone in the Cape Breton Highlands National Park, a park where the resident coyotes had adapted to survive on a limited food supply. They'd learned how to hunt and kill moose, something that is out of the ordinary for most coyotes. While hiking alone, Mitchell was attacked by 2 coyotes on the trail. Her screams were heard by another hiker who called 911. When RCMP officers arrived, they shot one of the coyotes and had Mitchell airlifted to Queen Elizabeth II Health Sciences Center in Halifax. She was covered in bites and she died early Wednesday morning on October 27, 2009. Don't underestimate wildlife and be careful when hiking alone. In Mitchell's defense, this sort of attack is out of character for most coyotes. They've been known to attack pets, but attacking and killing an adult human is rare. It's just proof that you should always be on your guard while around wild animals, no matter how harmless they may seem. Business magnate Steve Jobs doesn't seem like an obvious choice for our list. He died due to complications from pancreatic cancer, so why is he on the list? He might have lived if he had received proper medical care instead of trying to cure himself. In 2003, when he was first diagnosed, doctors recommended surgery, but Jobs delayed the surgery for 9 months. He attempted to treat himself with alternative medicines, which might have actually made his condition worse. He'd let his cancer spread for 9 months before he finally agreed to surgery, and doctors believe that delay is what led to his death. According to medical professionals, he had a type of pancreatic cancer that is treatable. Instead, Jobs turned to alternative therapies like acupuncture, herbal, diet, fruit juice therapy, and spiritual consultations. He found a lot of these cures on the internet, ignoring pleas from his distressed friends and family to have the surgery. Once he decided to undergo surgery, it's said that Jobs completely changed his mind about this type of treatment. He put energy into researching experimental methods of cancer treatment to try to survive. He spent thousands of dollars on alternative treatments, such as genome sequencing and targeted drug therapy. He was put on the list to receive a liver transplant. Sadly, it was too late, and the doctors were no longer able to save him. So while Steve Jobs isn't an idiot for having cancer, as that would be a ridiculous claim, he is the poster child for why it's important to listen to your doctor. Take cancer seriously, folks. Get checked often, get a second opinion when necessary, and most importantly, listen to your doctors. It may just save your life. If you want to hear more about dumb ways to die, check out Dumb Ways to Die Florida Edition, or watch this video instead.